Good morning, everybody, and welcome along to our Securing the Edge conference that we are running today. My name is Dave Draw. I am the Group CTO for Bytes here in the UK, and I am here to moderate today for the polls and the questions and to introduce our speakers. First, I just want to do a few bits of introduction to make sure you're all aware of how things are going to work and what's going to happen throughout the day. So just click on. So fire exits. Well, hopefully you all know where your fire exits are. Hopefully they're, the quickest way out of your studies or wherever you're going to be going. So yeah, hopefully you all know that. You're all muted, obviously, but our other speakers are also muted. There is a system on the screen for you to ask questions and click through and interact with us. So if you utilize that to ask any questions, we will be watching those throughout the session and we will capture those later on. Like I said, there will be polls throughout. And in actual fact, I do have just a little bit of a test poll I want to put up on the screen for you. So hopefully, if you all look on the right side, you will see a test poll about coffee. So if as many of you as possible can work through that for us, just so we can see if it's actually working or not, that'd be fantastic. Just to make sure you're all awake this morning. There will be polls, as I said, after every single one of our speakers, just asking some questions about what they have been covering. And we will have some prizes for those. And I'll go over that a little bit when we get to the first set of polls. But there is genuine cash vouchers available here for you guys to get your hands on. And I think we've got a few £100 here up for grabs if you actually sit in on the whole session and participate in all of the polls. There's actually a decent amount of money. I know these virtual conferences, we're all working from home. It's very easy to get distracted with other things. But if you can hang in with us and attend all the sessions, there is very much some money available for you at the end of this. On your main screen, underneath the video feed and the polls, you've got a submit feedback button. Towards the end of the sessions, if you can utilize that, that'd be fantastic, and it will give us an idea of what's gone well, what's gone badly, and what we need to do to improve these sessions in the future. And yeah, that's us for this morning. So I've got a couple of bits, like I said, that I just want to go through. So let's go through the agenda. First off, you have to deal with me for 10 or 15 minutes, waffling on. Any of you that have been to any of our presentations and conferences before will know I tend to do a fairly rapid fire, but hopefully brief intro. We've then got Steve McCarthy from Palo Alto, Kevin Butler from Okta, Zeki from Crowdstrike, and Trevor from Illumio. And they're all going to be covering off their own individual topics in their own individual areas. But if we've got it right, we are all loosely going to be of one theme, which is obviously the theme of the conference, Securing the Edge. After we've done all of that, we will have a speaker Q&A session where you will be able to ask any questions you want. We will have 5 minutes in between the sessions. So if you do have a question specific for that speaker, please utilize those 5 minutes. We're going to do a few polls. I'll take a couple of questions throughout those 5 minutes. And then we'll move on to the next speaker. So just so you all know, we're sort of on half an hour slots for everybody. Palo Alto at 10, Okta at 10:30, Crowdstrike at 11, Illumio around 11:30. However, we may well run a little bit longer for some of the presenters, but they've all promised me that even if they get handed time at the front of their presentation, they won't be stealing any time from each other at the end of their presentations. And they will run to time in terms of their handovers. So, but we'll see. This is not my first rodeo of doing this, and all of us do this because we love the sound of our own voices, and as such, trying to get us to shut up can be quite difficult. So, we'll see. I've got my panel of speakers in front of me. I can see all of them, and at least one of them is smirking as I say that. So we'll see how it goes. So who are we? Quick introduction to Bytes for those of you that may not know us. And specifically the security function with Bytes, because it's a little bit different to possibly how you might remember it. Bytes software services within the UK always had a security function for the last few years, specializing really around the endpoint and cloud services type products specifically. I've actually come from the security partnerships side of the business, Bytes Security Partnerships, and we were more involved around the network security and cloud stuff and cloud areas. What we've done at the start of this year is we've brought those two security functions together. There's no point having two within the same group in the UK. And we have created the security function within Bytes here in the UK, of which I am CTO of. So it's a dedicated security team within the overall business. Over 65 dedicated security staff within that group. We hold top tier accreditations with an awful lot of vendors these days. And we have still our direct to engineer Spark support desk, and we still have all of the implementation teams available that we had before for all the different products that we do. And it's a highly skilled team, and it's a highly skilled group of people. And the nice thing about this is that we've kept everything that was good about both businesses, and we've also added some more stuff in. So last year, we, within the group, created Bytes Cyber Consulting, which is a Crowdstrike certified cyber consulting house, able to do incident response, pen testing, PCI audit, etc., GDPR, all of that good stuff. So all in all, as you can probably gather, it's a pretty all-encompassing portfolio of security solutions and security stuff that we can now do. Obligatory pretty slides that kind of hopefully will build all right that you'll all see. This kind of just covers those key areas. So the cyber consulting area is one of the key ones. 24/7 help desk is key, and obviously in-house professional services. One of the bits that I think gets overlooked is the ability for us to interact at a sales level from quite a detailed security level. A lot of the top-end security specialists for within the old BSP, Bytes Security Partnerships business, have now gone in as overlay people into the broader Bytes sales business, which means the account managers within Bytes have that security specialism to draw on all of the time. Which means we have security specialists available to go into any account to work with any account on any challenge they may have. So if you do have any challenges, please do pick up the phone to your account manager. We have done a pretty large number of incident response calls over the last few weeks, and some of it, I mean, our head of cyber consulting, Steve Marshall, kind of said to me the other day, what I wouldn't give just for a simple malware case at the moment. We've had people making stuff up. We've had ISPs overlapping networks and allowing data to leak between different networks. I mean, we've had all sorts of stuff over the last couple of weeks within cyber consulting, anything but what you would normally expect. And I think that really is part of the challenge of the world we're currently in. Again, another slide just covering those services specifically and what we do. So without further ado, I'll talk a little bit about securing the edge and certainly what that means to me. And any of you that have had a conversation with me over the last few weeks will know that, this home working versus working from home thing is a little bit of a hobby horse with me. Now, it seems obvious, and any of you who've spoken to me will know this already, so I apologize for that. But business has changed. This is not a hard sell conference off the back of the fact that COVID-19 is happening. That's not what this is about at all. But I think we have to be realistic that business has changed. I know certainly my business has changed, and what's happening within my business is slightly different now. And within IT security, for a long time we talked about layers, and then we started talking about avocados and all sorts of other stupid ways of referring to IT security. The layers was all about onions and layers of security and having to get to the middle. And then we talked about avocado security, where everything is a soft, diffuse layer around the outside, but the hardcore is your data in the middle. And we love coming up with something different and something different to talk about. But really, this has all been shaken up because what was the norm for a lot of businesses is now not the norm. And businesses are finding themselves in a situation where they need to adapt. So I just want to talk about this thing that is working from home and home working, because as a person that works in the IT security industry, I work with a lot of people, and actually, the guys that are on the call with us today would probably all put themselves in these categories. They were not people that worked from home. They were home workers. They didn't have an office. They didn't have a desk in an office or a phone on a desk. That's not how they worked. But if you work from home, you probably have a desk, or definitely have a desk. We at Bytes have desks with phones on them. And if you work from home occasionally, you maybe work from home 1 or 2 days a week, you maybe work from home 1 or 2 days a month. Your machine still visited the office regularly. You had a phone on a desk, even if it was a phone you had to sign into because you hot desk. You went to the office, and it made life really easy for us as IT people, and particularly as IT security people, because those devices did come back to the office fairly regularly. And because they came back to the office fairly regularly, we were able to be not lazy. Lazy is the wrong word, but we very definitely had the comfort factor of being able to, if anything went wrong, we could just visit a machine because the machine went back to the office. And even the guys from the vendors, they probably had an IT person within their office. And if they did have an IT problem with their equipment, they could go into the office and get it looked at, or at the very least, they could send it back and get it turned around fairly quickly. But the machines were still tied to an office in a lot of cases. And like I said, that could deal with its software installations, patching, backups, squirting large amounts of data over the wire for backups. It could deal with making changes. If you want to roll out a new piece of software, add stuff, take stuff away. It gave us all a way of doing that. And maybe because that device was working in that way, it wasn't inherently secure and designed to be let out into the big wide world full time on its own. Definitely not full time, even if it was able to do it part time. But of course, now we've moved into a world where a lot more people are home working. And that's a continuous situation. And all of a sudden, just dealing with hardware repairs, getting laptops out to people, getting laptops back from people, getting laptops re-imaged changes the way people do things. And I know we at Bytes, we've talked about, in the past, we've run a virtual conference around Windows Virtual Desktop. I know we're getting record demand for people wanting to roll out, the real Microsoft toys that they have around autopilot and the seamless building and resetting of devices remotely so staff can get their devices re-imaged without having to do anything. Just getting remote patching, remote help desk, software implementation, just making everything seamless. And I know obviously Steve is going to talk about some of the underlying layers in a minute when he goes through the Palo stack. But actually, if we look at what we've got here and the vendors that we've got established, for me, they are basically working together to deliver on what I've got here on this screen. So we have a seamlessly integrated underlying network fabric, which means wherever a device is, it is effectively part of your network and it can be treated as part of your network. We have single sign-on capabilities, authentication, password resets. I mean, the number of password resets, I don't know what your team, how your teams are doing out there for you guys that are watching on the other side of this, but I know that the number of password resets our internal support guys had to do as people's passwords came up for expiry and reset them wrong, and because they couldn't go back to the office and just plug it in and do a password reset on the desk, it was a real problem for them. So, password expiry is a menace. We've got single sign-on available to us as part of this stack today. Genuine next generation endpoint protection and the ability to spin up devices wherever they are from an infrastructure point of view, but still build logical networks and control the devices between them. So we really do have the ability with the vendors we have on this call to be incredibly agile. But I think the other thing is, for a lot of businesses, one of the key things that was in their DR strategy documents that they probably dusted off once a year for review was that, they could either lose the office or an event could happen, particularly if you were London-based or within the M25, an event could happen which meant your staff lost access to the office. And that was an incident. That was a disaster recovery situation. And now it's full time. We've had, 10 weeks of that. March 23rd, we went into lockdown. We've had weeks and weeks and weeks of running like that. I think a lot of businesses find themselves in a situation where actually they can't fall back from where they are, if you like, that they have they're already in DR and they're having to work out what the next level of DR is. What if they started losing infrastructure now? As I said, just trying to make sure remote patching is handled coherently. We're getting a lot of questions around that. The amount of time that we are spending troubleshooting end user internet connections as an IT team within Bytes for our staff, and having to issue requirements around Zoom, around Teams, around Skype, any of these platforms, WebEx, Google Meet, run a speed test. If you don't get these numbers, it won't work. Yet it still seems to be IT's problem. So trying to make this situation as seamless as possible. And as I alluded to earlier when I talked about some of the incidents we've dealt with, fear of breaches is driving behavior. Businesses are much more worried than they would be otherwise. I mean, some of the incidents that we've had logged, very much, if we were all in the office and if the staff were all in the office, you would look at it and you would just go, do you know what? That's absolutely fine. We can see there's nothing malicious happening on the network. It's not a problem. Everything's working normally. I can talk to that person. I can talk to that person. I can visit that server. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. And everything's absolutely fine. And actually, what we are seeing is a panic logging of incident response issues and a lot of excess spend. And don't get me wrong, we have found stuff as part of those incidents. And actually, we found stuff we didn't go looking for. But I do think that if businesses can get just a slightly more coherent strategy going forward and work with partners such as ourselves and through us, some of such as the vendors that we've got here, they can put themselves in a much better place where they will be able to respond appropriately and only bring in outside help when they actually need it, which I think is going to be really key for businesses going forward. As I said, businesses, they need to reevaluate their strategy and they need to reevaluate what they're doing. So hopefully there's been some responses to the coffee poll. So I'm going to basically now you're all going to see me go into my concentrating phase where I have to go and work out how to do this. So what I am going to do is close the poll, I think. This is the first one. This is why we're doing this as a test. And we can have a quick look at the poll results we had. And you've all managed to respond. And the fact that we've got some fairly random percentages there means that I think that's all worked okay. And you've all managed to put some stuff in there. So that's great. So first poll done. First bit of blurb done for me. I'm now in moderating mode for the rest of the morning, so I can relax a little bit and hand the pressure over. Steve, are you there? Are you ready for me to hand over the baton?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you absolutely fine.
Thank you, David. So good morning, everyone. I hope you're all sitting comfortably in your home, at your kitchen table, maybe on the sofa in the lounge, or perhaps you're still in the bath, or just taking schooling the children. Don't worry, wherever you are, you're on mute, but whatever room you join us from this morning, a very warm welcome to this webinar on cloud-delivered security from Palo Alto Networks. I'm Steve McCarthy. I'm a cloud security sales specialist here at Palo Alto, and I'll be your host for the next 25 minutes. So cloud and mobility are probably the biggest catalyst driving increased business agility. For example, mobile banking is now the new normal for most of us, but the world of paper, statements and high street branches wasn't that long ago. And that's the reality of cloud adoption. And the reality of cloud adoption is not how many are using it. It's really what are they using it, or why they're using it. So the agility, and David referred to this earlier on, the agility gained out of migrating to the cloud can have a much bigger impact on the bottom line than often the IT spend itself. And sometimes migrating to the cloud could actually be more expensive than on-premise. But the gains in the speed to develop applications, make users more productive, that's what's helping the businesses achieve their goals, as again, David referred to that earlier as well. Mobility, well, mobility is mobility. Workforces are becoming more agile, working from anywhere to be as real time as possible, and something that we've seen quite a lot of in recent times. However, as often in life, progress can come at a cost. And in this case, it's risk. We're in unprecedented times in terms of cyber risk and cyber fraud, as you can see from some of the statistics there. And it is just a numbers game. Businesses have to get this right every time, all the time. The media is full of very, very high profile cases where businesses and organizations who didn't get it right and paid the price, in some cases a very high one. So the message here is don't become one of these statistics. Clearly, there are a lot of things going on in the world right now. But if you have a look at the Alliance Risk Barometer, which is an annual survey that was released in January of this year, and there's a couple of things on there to note that global pandemic isn't even on there. And bear in mind, this started the back end of 2019. But cyber has slowly worked itself up over the last 5 years. Last year, it was second, and this year, it's top of that list. So cloud is also a key driver behind network transformation. Cloud offers organizations a potential of a significant increase in agility, as we've already said, and that's a highly sought after commodity in this digital world. For a lot of organizations, the internet is fast becoming their new corporate network. Applications are moving to the cloud, plus of course the proliferation of SaaS-based services. So the network really becomes an access technology for cloud and cloud services. But again, there's the potential for increased risk with users accessing service and applications from any locations. So the message here is the network can't transform without security. So this is something that Gartner recognized and called out the need for a different approach to networking and security. In a report that they published in August 2019, they introduced the concept of Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE for short. The first thing to point out is SASE is just a concept. It's not a standard. It is just a concept that's being advocated by Gartner. So many of you may be familiar with SASE in the report, but the report's certainly available. And in that report, Gartner put out a number of key findings and recommendations. One is the fact that more users, devices, applications, and data are now located outside the enterprise. I think, again, recent times has taken that to a whole new level altogether. Some other of Gartner's recommendations include the adoption of SASE as a digital business enabler in the name of speed and agility. So again, that theme of agility again. Also, to reduce the complexity on the network security side by moving ideally to one vendor for secure web gateway, CASB, DNS, and zero trust network access. So Gartner is actually advocating vendor consolidation. Now that might be music to the ears of many, but maybe not to a lot of vendor security and network vendors. Okay, so all SASE really is putting a name on a convergence of things that we all talk about now, we're all familiar with now, but perhaps in a way that allows us to think about it more holistically. Nothing in that list that you can see on the screen is new to any of us, but a lot of organizations have addressed them individually, often by different teams within that organization. Security as a service capabilities, now that's been around for a little bit longer, probably maturing over the last few years. Network as a service is really taking hold now as organizations try to build more cloud-ready and cloud-forward networks. But the abstraction of both the control and data plane from on-premise to the cloud does yield potential efficiencies in end user to application performance. I think about it, what's the purpose of a network? Ultimately, the purpose of a network is to connect users to their applications and their data the most efficient and the most performant way possible. So the SASE model lays out different challenges to those two groups of impacted vendors. You have network vendors come into the SASE world, need to address the security aspect, and security vendors like Palo Alto Networks, who want to have SASE offerings, need to address the network side of it. So let's have a look and go through how Palo Alto is approaching the SASE challenge. Palo Alto has what we call our Strata network security platform. Strata is all about securely connecting any device, user, or location anywhere in the world to the data, applications, and services they need to consume from wherever they wish to consume it, and delivering the users the most performant experience possible. So in that, we believe that any unified approach to security and networking that Gartner is advocating with SASE has got three fundamental principles. It needs to be consistent. It doesn't matter what the starting point is or what the current situation, every step in that transformation process needs to be consistent and have the same capabilities in terms of security, visibility, and deployment. It needs to be integrated. Whatever the next steps are, new deployments or deployment steps, they have to be fully integrated. So in other words, management, operations, security options need to be the same, irrespective of the variant of security that's being implemented. And finally, it has to be effective and agile. And that means, again, back to agility. It's a common theme here. New use cases can be deployed in weeks, or in hours or days instead of weeks or months. Again, COVID-19 was an example of that with home working. We saw a lot of organizations who very, very quickly had to upscale the number of remote workers. And in some cases, it went well. In other cases, it didn't go very well. So Palo Alto, again, coming from our proven heritage in security, we'd like to think that we're the undisputed leader in next generation firewalls. Certainly Gartner would advocate that as well. And in fact, Palo Alto pioneered the next generation firewall. So that original form factor of a hardware platform has evolved into a virtual form factor in our VM series. And now, more recently, we have the cloud delivered security service, which is called Prisma Access. The development of this evolution has been such that all of the security subscriptions that many of you may be familiar with, they're common across all three form factors, so threat prevention, sandbox, DLP, etc. And also, all three form factors are managed by and configured by the same Panorama management platform. Okay, so what? Well, we all know that customer network and security environments are complex, even before we start getting into SASE and the consolidation. So it's not a black and white situation. So you can't just have a customer that will need on-premise, another customer that will need virtual, another setup that will need a cloud. So having that true multi-form factor is really trying to address the complexity of a customer's environment and organization's environment, and what we believe sets Palo Alto apart. Okay, so look, in terms of the components of the SASE model, two elements to it: network and security. And to be honest, this is the way that Prisma Access has been architected anyway, even before Gartner introduced the SASE concept. Prisma Access Cloud Service has to have comprehensive networking capabilities and functionality anyway, for it to be delivered as a global cloud service, because you're pulling together all these cloud nodes and networking them together. So we'll touch on that shortly. So Prisma Access by design is a secure access service edge. Cloud service providing that full security stack in the cloud at the point of access from the edge. So whether this is from a mobile user, a branch office, HQ location, doesn't matter. Again, comprised of those two layers: connectivity, a connectivity layer and a network layer and a security layer. The connectivity layer is all about on-ramping the user and connecting the user to the closest point of presence for the most performant experience. Again, coming back to the purpose of a network in this environment is to get the users into the cloud. The security layer on top of that delivers a full cloud-hosted security stack delivered as a service, and which, as you would expect from Palo Alto, is that's our heritage. There is a guide to SASE which you can download from the Palo Alto website. The Prisma Access Cloud, all locations around the world, basically is architected on Google and AWS. So we're leveraging all of their points of presence for that scale, reliability, resilience, and content, in addition to their peering with the major SaaS service providers. So this slide here shows the GCP and AWS fiber backbone. So Palo Alto is using the cloud for our own cloud service, as opposed to being locked into, I guess, the rigidity and restrictions of a DIY cloud or a cloud that we built ourselves. So that is the bedrock of the Palo Alto Cloud Prisma Access service. So the Prisma Access services around the world, they provide the organizations or our customers with the access point that's closest to the users and their offices. So effectively, you can run a global organization in places where you don't have IT resources, so hopefully impacting operational costs associated with setting up networks and data centers in those areas, and that thereby allowing the company to grow. And auto scaling up and down is key here. And we've had a lot of customers recently who've had to scale very, very quickly from a few hundred mobile users, perhaps to several thousand mobile users. And very soon they may have to go back the other way. So in Prisma Access, that just happens because we let Google and AWS take care of all of that. which is why we can offer performance-based SLAs on SaaS applications, including Office 365. We don't have to run around the globe frantically trying to get equipment and connectivity into data centers. We're letting Google and AWS take care of that heavy lifting. And from a network service perspective, network as a service perspective, things just got a whole lot more interesting in the Palo Alto SASE world. And that's with the recent acquisition of CloudGenix. So Palo Alto is known for our best-in-class security, and we deliver comprehensive security, SASE security cloud solution with our own SD-WAN capabilities. But with the addition now of CloudGenix, effectively we're bringing together their best-in-class cloud-delivered SD-WAN with our best-in-class security. So thereby offering consistency across all methods, all users, whether in the branch, retail or mobile, across the globe, high performance network with SLA guarantees I mentioned earlier for both security processing and end-to-end latency. So the combination of Palo Alto, Prisma Access, and CloudGenix really is a case of the sum being greater than the individual parts. Okay, so let's just move on to look at securing the mobile workforce with a SASE-based solution. Right. So the traditional and the discussion here is around mobile. David said in his introduction, some of the challenges that Bytes are seeing at the moment, and certainly one of the challenges that we've seen with a lot of organizations is scaling mobile users in a world which has traditionally been delivered using virtual private network or VPN. So VPN typically involves deploying VPN gateways, remote access servers, VPN concentrators in data centers. There's two big issues here, and that's scalability and performance. So typically, organizations will size a VPN for a percentage of remote or mobile users. It could be around the 15 to 20% of their workforce. Not always. Obviously, some businesses, like many of the businesses that are talking to you today, probably have a higher percentage. But for a typical organization, about 15 to 20%. So what happens if you need more, and what happens if you need it quickly? It's highly relevant in today's world. You've got to procure an awful lot more kit very quickly, plus internet links from data centers to the internet. They're going to be hit with a huge increase in traffic. So how do you increase link speeds in a matter of days or hours? So let's have a look at this if we use a representative network architecture with branches and mobile users that go to the data center, cloud, software as a service, and the web. So if you think about more users working remotely, it's a growth trend anyway, but recently it's grown massively. So this increases the inbound internet traffic to the VPN gateway. More user traffic coming in. Branch office traffic traditionally is backhauled to the data center, so that can then ingress into the security stack in the data center and therefore be cleansed and egressed out to the internet or the SaaS-based applications. But more and more branch offices want to route directly to the cloud. It's more efficient and it's potentially lower cost. So lots of applications and services have moved to SaaS and the cloud. Therefore, you get the hairpin of this traffic, of VPN traffic coming back in for remote users, has increased the throughput demands on the remote access gateway infrastructure. Now, you can try and scale by adding more appliances in the data center, but they don't solve the rest of the capacity problem related to those internet circuits and those connectivity gateways. Also, you've got other components in there, such as edge routers, load balancers, switches, and so on. And from a user perspective, you'd get a much better user experience if you access SaaS-based services such as Office 365 directly. But of course, that opens up security risks that your endpoint security devices aren't necessarily going to deal with. So with Prisma Access, all of that goes away. the user's traffic is routed directly to its destination, whether that's the internet, the public cloud, or the data center, and secured via the Prisma Access security stack in the cloud. Also applying the customer's own policies as well as to what users are and aren't allowed to do. So all of the mobile user traffic comes into the Prisma Access cloud, and then it's routed securely to wherever it needs to go to. The traffic routing and device posture check-in is all handled by the Global Protect client that sits on that mobile device. So let's have a look at our spaghetti network in a Prisma Access world. Okay, what you're seeing here on the screen is this is a representation of our Prisma Access cloud service. So I mentioned previously that we're using the GCP and AWS backbone. So all of the connectivity here is handled by that high speed, high performance, high resilient backbone. So now what happens? Inbound user traffic is redirected to the appropriate destination, whether that's the internet, the cloud, software as a service, which means that only traffic meant for the data center hosted applications is now coming in. Obviously, there'll be some inbound traffic to the data center, but it's limited and it's less than it was before because we're now routing user traffic direct to internet, cloud, or SaaS, and so on. So the users are on-ramped to the Prisma Access at the closest possible edge location. That's the SASE piece that we talked about earlier on, utilizing that global network of Prisma Access locations. And again, the only traffic to the data center, the only data center traffic to the internet is just from data center hosted applications and services. So performance from a remote user perspective is improved because you've mitigated any network capacity issues that pinch point at the data center. That's mobile users, but from a branch office perspective, branch offices can also be on-ramped to the closest Prisma Access SASE edge location. And now potentially with CloudGenix, using SD-WAN cloud hosted application aware SD-WAN services as well into that. So, how SASE is that? Okay, I'm just coming to the end of my slot. I'd like to finish with a slide, which I think is a really neat summary of where the industry has been, and I guess where the industry is going, from a fragmented world to, I suppose, the holy grail from a security perspective of highly predictive cybersecurities. And a lot of organizations can look at this and sort of reflect and see where they are on that path, what they've achieved already, and what's next. So thank you for your time and attention. If we have any questions, David, we're running to time. I think I've been good.
You've been brilliant. Thank you very much. All good in terms of a timing point of view. From a question point of view, they're being a little bit quiet at the moment. It has to be said. It always takes them a little while to warm up, I think. What I'm going to do is yeah, well, yeah, I've got a couple of questions. So first off, let me just put the poll visible for everybody. So just a few questions. I'm going to put the poll visible. So if you all want to go and have a look at that. There is a little bit of a time delay between what we're saying and what you guys can see. So hopefully the poll is showing. I mean, the most obvious question and the one that we have had through, Steve, is mobile devices. So, laptops, all that kind of stuff, that's all fine. Can we do any checks with Prisma Access before we allow the more mobile devices, iPhones, iPads, anything like that?
Good question. I referred to it a little bit, but I'll elaborate on that. So HIP, which stands for Host Information Protocol. So HIP checks can be carried out by the Prisma Access agent, the Prisma Access Global Protect agent that sits on your mobile device, Android, iPhone, Windows, whatever your laptop, tablet, mobile. So it can carry out some checks even before allowing the mobile user to connect to the Prisma Access cloud service. So it can posture check for, I mean, a whole range of parameters. So has the device got the latest version of OS installed? Is disk encryption enabled? Password recovery and so on. Yeah. So yeah, it is possible for allowing that extra layer of security to do those hip checks on the device.
Okay, cool. All right, no, that's good to understand. And just out of interest, where would you draw the line? Where do Palo draw the line on what a mobile device is? Because I think that's kind of a question that we sometimes get. Is it just a phone? Is it a phone and an iPad? Is it Surfaces always seem to occupy that slightly murky territory in between, although largely they're a laptop, aren't they? You know, where for you does mobile device end and laptop start?
Okay, so from a Prisma Access perspective, it's more about the user as opposed to the device. Obviously, the device is what the user is using, and I know we'll come and talk about authentication with some of the later presentations. But from our perspective, it's the user. So the user can have effectively unlimited devices. What we are counting is the number of authenticated users. So it's about authenticated users because their credentials will be across all of those devices. So it's not so much about the device, it's all about the user.
Okay, all right, understood. So they've all responded to the first poll, and they've all chipped in their answers. So they're under IONs. Obviously, they know what SASE stood for. So they've been paying attention. So they correctly said Secure Access Service Edge. Although worryingly, we had a little bit of Secure Access Secure Edge. So maybe a little bit of dozing off from people. It's a sneaky one having that one in there. The second one is up at the moment, and there's a lot of 150s being gambled about, but they're not sure 150 what at the moment in terms of the answers that are coming on that, but we'll come back to that in a second. I mean, I think we're seeing really the Prisma Access setup and the way that the machines really, you know, you turn it on, and particularly in the case of a laptop or a working device, if you like, you know, it's instantly on to that secure backbone. And particularly, as you said, with the introduction of CloudGenix as well as an acquisition, I think it makes it very, very compelling in terms of, you know, effectively any laptop that's out there in the field or any device that's out there in the field is on your, it's not on your office network, but it's on the network, and it can be treated as such. And you've got, you know, a really nice Palo Alto driven security layer. I mean, have you guys seen a big uptick in demand for this as a result of what's going on, or have you seen the demand be roughly level and on the same trajectory it was before?
So probably a couple of things there. Certainly the demand for remote access, that use case of Prisma Access has absolutely skyrocketed in the last few weeks and months. What we are seeing now, and you mentioned with the CloudGenix acquisition, that's really interesting, and I'll kind of explain why CloudGenix and Prisma Access is a very good fit, and also Palo Alto itself uses CloudGenix in our own network, our own enterprise network. We use CloudGenix, and the opportunities to utilize CloudGenix as well as from a customer perspective, but that technology can also be used from our perspective. I talked about the edge and getting users into the Prisma Access cloud. There's a great opportunity for us to be using CloudGenix there as well. And the reason why we think it's compelling is Prisma Access is second generation cloud service, cloud security service. There are, you know, cloud security services, you know, that have been around longer than Prisma Access, but we would consider it to be first generation. So why are we second generation? So it's built on our firewall as a service. It's a security stack in the cloud. It's more than just a proxy service in the cloud that's focused on web traffic. It's full layer.
You're allowed to use the proxy word, even loosely like that. I thought, you know, Palo Alto being the proxy killer, except you're not even allowed to use it, are you, in a presentation?
I've used it, so and I'm still breathing. But the Palo Alto approach to security, which is full layer 7 inspection, and again that's also into our view of zero trust. Unless you're inspecting at layer 7 all of the traffic, then how can it be zero trust? Yes, you can do some identity authentication, but ultimately full zero trust is about inspection. So with CloudGenix is a application-centric layer 7 SD-WAN cloud delivered SD-WAN service. So the synergies between Prisma Access and CloudGenix are huge. That real focus on layer 7, because at the end of the day, if you're inspecting at layer 3 or layer 4, but the bad guys have worked out how to get through that. So that's why we feel that the combination of Prisma Access and CloudGenix it will be a compelling one. The acquisition has obviously only just happened, so a little bit of watch this space on some of that, but yeah, it will be very, very interesting, particularly as we move into a SASE world.
Yeah, no, thank you. Okay, so let's just review our poll results for a second. So in terms of the annual profits from cybercrime in 2019, they were very, very evenly split between 150 million, 150 billion, and 1.5 trillion, 21%, 26%, 32%. They and a billion as well. So they all kind of went all the way across spread. Which one was it, Steve? Just put them out of their misery.
That's 1.5 trillion.
Yeah, just they edged that. And what percentage of business use the cloud? If we put that one up for people to look at the answers for that. So this is quite interesting. They were very torn between 74% or 94%.
94.
94, yeah. So I mean, it is. I mean, almost everybody has a footprint in there of some kind, don't they? Let me just quickly review whether we've had any other questions. We have not. So, Steve, with that, I'll say thank you very much, and be good to get some of the other questions, some of your input on some of the other things that the other guys have been talking about at the Q&A at the end. So, thank you very much. You're released for an hour or so
I'm free to go.
Whatever else that we all desperately need to do.
I think it might be maths and English that needs doing now, so it's my turn.
No worries, Steve. We'll see you later on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys, right. So we move on. So next up, we've got Kevin from Okta. Before he does his bit a little bit, thank you very much for those of you that have responded to the polls. Just a couple of little bits of housekeeping for you first. So we have a winner from the first set of polls, Paul Farrell. Thank you. You have won a £25 voucher for participating in the first set of polls. For those of you that didn't click on the polls that we've just done, I've been a little bit sneaky. There's a £50 voucher available for one of you that clicked on that last set of polls. There'll be a bigger voucher available for the next set of polls. So I imagine that will probably get a few more of you to click through onto those polls and give us some of your opinions. Guys, please do ask some questions as well. Just a few other little points of housekeeping that I may have forgotten about at the beginning and has been pointed out to me by Shona. Those of you that stay connected and attentive for the whole session, you will get a £50 lunch voucher through from us. So lunch will be on us today in exchange for you giving up your morning. And as a final prize for the surveys, there will be a surprise, which I will share later in the session. It's a surprise because Shona and I haven't 100% agreed what it's going to be yet, but we're nearly there, we think, depending how many people we've got on today and what kind of mix of people we've got on today, but it will be worth having. So in exchange for the feedback, giving us your time for the feedback, there will be a prize for that as well. So plenty of reasons to pay attention. Plenty of reasons to stay on this morning with us. What I am going to do now is hand over to Kevin. So yeah, Kevin, without further ado, over to you, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, David. So good morning to everybody. Welcome to the Bytes virtual conference. So my name is Kevin Butler from Okta. I'm a solutions engineer working with Okta in the identity and access management space, and have significant industry experience elsewhere. And so it's very interesting listening to Steve there look at how the last few weeks and months of the pandemic impact has had significant change to the likes of remote working. And yeah, like a few of us, we do work from home a fair bit, but we're working a lot more these days. So anyway, with further ado, let's move some slides into. Yes, that's right. Yeah, so what I'm going to do for the next 20-25 minutes is talk about zero trust, the impact of workforce, remote, some differences, how do we go about it. But the significant element is most of these network things are device-based. The whole point here is it's human access. Therefore, we want to be able to identify who the human user is. And all of us these days are getting used to the idea of digital identities, but we've probably got too many of them. So the concept of having a single identity that's used across many different environments would be a good thing to do. And that's partly where the differentiation between, say, workforce and what we refer to as customer. So if you look at how it was yesterday or the day before, many moons back, single silo stacks, individual applications, many users, you had user identities for all those different types of systems. So, you know, the main players there were IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, you name it. If you go far enough back, digital equipment, all sorts of different players. Whereas today, it's not a single stack. It's very much mixed systems or referred to as hybrid. We've had the advent of the cloud services, applications moving out of the cloud. And as Steve mentioned, that was driven through some of it through remote working. But if you think how it's now changed completely, some of the applications are still on the inside, and we as users today are on the outside completely. So hence the drive and the demand for things like VPNs and other mechanisms for gaining access. And certainly from an Okta point of view, we've seen a significant growth. If we actually look at usage, not surprisingly, the top usage is video conferencing and VPN services, and in terms of actually tracking. Now, the reason we do that is, you know, we get a picture of who all the users are and the individual named users, which is very key as part of tracking purposes and audit purposes. So today we're seeing a lot of that. Whereas ideally, what we're actually looking for is a set of network services, a single identity service, rather than having multiples. So a lot of organizations have the workforce ID, there's the customer ID, and then what do you do with B2B in the middle? So key things here really is trying to join all those together. And as has been mentioned already, device is becoming an important thing in identity as well. Well, is it? No, it's been device for some while. Many organizations, you logged into the device, it was on the corporate network, and that was who you were. You weren't an individual. You typically had multiple IDs. You think about mainframes and all sorts of things that were very disparate. Whereas today, we'd really want to be recognized as our human with the personas that we've actually got. And we still end up using lots of different personas and different cloud services. So really what we're actually talking about is if you actually look at it in the perspective of customer and us as our persona and consumer as opposed to user, it's still very similar. There was the stack, you had to build it yourself typically, whereas today, microservices are a key element of this capability. There's no boundaries in place. That's really the key element. But there's lots of different services to choose from. But again, you're ending up having to register in multiple ways. So there is advents there, but even down to purchasing online services, verification through SMSs, they're all still very device-centric as opposed to human-centric. So really what we want to see is a core service that provides that human element of it and is identifiable as the human users. And that's where Okta comes from. Okta's been providing its identity cloud service now for over 10 years, built in the cloud for the cloud, and we're very much the Gartner leader in terms of that capability and expanding into the areas of APIs, consumer side supporting it, and we've been recognized for that. How do we pull this all together? What's the point in terms of applying it to the likes of zero trust or controlled access? So yesterday, as was mentioned, was the firewall, it was the VPN, it's the combination. The old way of doing things, if you're inside the perimeter, then you had access. If you're outside the perimeter, you were treated differently. Today, it's very much identity is the driven perimeter. Identity is the key, and it helps us answer that key equation of who had access to what and how did they use it. If we're using device-based authentication, then it's challenged mapping back to that human identity. Whereas tomorrow we want to be able to really do that in terms of providing user experience, and it's people who are the boundary, not the physical office. And that's been accelerated now with the likes of the COVID pandemic. Everybody's been moved outside the actual corporate perimeter unless you're punching holes back in via VPN services. But that gives us challenges with like running capacity for video conferencing services and everything else that Steve just previously highlighted from the Palo Alto side. So moving forward, zero trust is a philosophy. A lot of people are thinking, oh, it's just another point product, just like email, file system, file service to actually buy. No, it's actually a change of mind in the way of thinking. And it comes from the fact that, as I say, what I've been describing is that you had the inside perimeter was trusted and assumed to be trusted. Once you're inside there, you could do what you like, or you could potentially do what you like if you had the access. Whereas the outside was untrusted. Whereas the reality is today, because we're all working with internet connection, multiple networks, mobile services, VPNs, you name it, there's no such thing as an inner sanctum that's safe and an outer point that's unsafe. It's a mix. And therefore, we actually really do find what's actually happening is that we need to identify the individuals, control the individual access. And that's down to the fact that what we're trying to do is collaboration. So the people can be classified in many different ways these days as humans, but we can have different personas or functions. So sometimes we're an employee, sometimes we could be an elevated administrator as a privileged user, or even a privileged business person. Having read access into a set of data records could be seen as a privilege. So from that point of view, that's true. And then contractors, we onboard contractors and treat those differently because they're not full-time employees, or are they? But then we've got our business partners and through to customers and consumers. So there's a complete range of users and people who want to gain access to different types of things. And those things are resources, as we've said already. Typically, it's things like infrastructure, applications, APIs, and various capabilities there. And if we actually look at the matrix of that, we end up with this mesh of access. And how would you actually try to actually control that using the traditional perimeter firewall controls, numerous policies, various other things of that nature? When in fact, the key element is really contextual access. How is the access being used and why is it being used and should you have it? So identity and access management is a very key part of applying and doing that. As a result, identity is the new perimeter. Credentials are a target as a result of that. And certainly from data breaches point of view, a lot of the stolen credentials, things have actually got better in the last 2 or 3 years. Previous years, a lot of the credentials were a lot higher, but those that are actually going after the credentials are getting a lot smarter, and there's a lot more targeted attacks, things like phishing attacks through email beyond what's going on. The biggest problem these days, though, is the growing use of people reusing the same passwords and services. And that was shown by some recent video playback services where brand new services have been launched. The service itself wasn't attacked. It was the people and the reuse of the passwords. The passwords have been harvested and people, basically those passwords are replayed into the service and you could gain access as if it's that user, which is then for driving the need to do things more than just using them passwords. So having things like multi-factor authentication and other validation methods is really a good move. And if the slide will, right. Yeah, so as I say, the key thing here is that from an attacker's point of view, they don't need to hack in anymore. They just need to log in, use the credentials they've got. And this is where contextual access really comes into its own. How do we actually then pick up based upon what a user's trying to do, what it's trying to use, where it's trying to use? So that's where our network context comes into things. So the ability to take threat intelligence is a mechanism we use in Okta to actually determine the actors in terms of IP addresses. So we've worked with many other partners in exchanging information relating to network anonymizers and known elements that are actually causing disruption on the network, shall we say. It's a polite way of putting it. But the point being is that we can add that with device context. So if we take devices, whether those devices are managed, known, new device, and that relationship between a user on a device is a known entity, we can actually trust that and provide a better level of competence of use or risk in that from that relationship with the device. But we then have to go through a process of tracking those devices, being aware of the devices and things. So corporates have done that in certain times. But from a remote point of view at present, if you're on a corporate issued device, great. If you're not on a corporate device, there's a lot of use of bring your own device these days to gain access to corporate, because 10 weeks ago there was a challenge getting hold of laptops. There was a big demand increase for laptops and remote access and things, so people started using their own systems. So again, how do you actually manage that from that perspective? So another element that could be brought into contextual access was location, and that's changed for a lot of people recently. It used to be the office, we could guarantee it through IP addresses. A lot more users are now actually gaining access from home-based broadbands with dynamic IP addresses and other geolocation elements. But equally, you can have network behavioral rules applied to login processes to check things like impossible travel, new countries, locations, and put some blocks in place and say, well, there should not be, say, net new users coming in from an unknown country or things of that nature. So again, contextual access with this combination gives us the ability to build up that picture of what's going on. And from that, we can then apply contextual response in terms of adaptive policies and make, feed into the application's usage, or decide, for instance, whether they're going to allow or deny access, or potentially request a step-up authentication or some other validation before the user is allowed in. Or the other option you've got is actually to feed back the application that the user is from a less trusted location, and therefore they should limit the actions that the people actually have got. So this is where the zero trust access methodology comes from, is ensuring that we've actually got the right people that've got the right level of access to the right resources in the right context, and we carry on applying that rather than just at the login time. We actually carry that on through the authorization. So if we understand the split between the user gaining access to a resource or website and logging in, those things could change as the user goes through it. So if for instance, the user is trying to actually do a change of address on a registration service or something like that, that's actually a very risky operation to do if it's done from the wrong place, because it could be not the user who owns the account actually trying to make the changes and doing some social engineering on it. So this is where we need to apply continuous assessment and check each time a transaction is requested within an app. But the other key thing we're trying to do is apply least friction as possible. In other words, user experience has to be good. So we end up with three fundamental properties of applying zero trust access. First key one is, and we should accept this, and it's very much accepted these days, is the perimeterless design. Or if you did think you had a perimeter, it's probably more operating like a sieve these days, where there's lots of holes in it, left, right, and center. So you need to be able to accept that. Context awareness, rather than just blatantly accepting a login as good, apply contextual access to everything. In other words, double check, verify for each request. Should the user have access? Are they doing it at the right time? And then apply dynamic access controls. As I say, with these combination of policies and things, you can then start applying particularly to those users who are going to have more elevated access. And that's where zero trust is, as I say, associated typically with gaining access to back-end services, various other infrastructure elements, which typically imply administrator level. But it can be equally applied to business level things. Your Twitter access, your Twitter account, it actually could cause a great amount of damage in an organization if misused. So having context awareness and the ability to say, not share the actual credentials for a Twitter account, but to enable access on a proxy mechanism to do that, we can actually apply that. So this is all part of the same thing in terms of zero trust capabilities. We've also then allows us to bring in things like passwordless experience. So one of the key areas is that a lot of us are familiar with username and password, but as we now move into devices, typing longer passphrases becomes a bit of a challenge, particularly in mobile devices and things. So having other forms of actual identity, be it those biometrics by proxy, built-in device touch sensors, tokens, hardware tokens, plug and play, we need to bring those all into the experience as well and still make it as seamless as possible. So certainly from an Okta point of view, we've got factor sequencing these days where we can actually bring things in terms of identity, but we can change the sequence around. So instead of it being the traditional username, password, and factor, we can actually now change it to username and factor, then say strong passphrase if required. And then that avoids brute force attacks and various other things, which is really password hackers and various other elements of that. So there's configuration and context policies that are worth sort of considering. And this is one of the quotes from the Zero Trust Extended Network projects and all the other elements that are building up and driving Zero Trust. But it came from Forrester Research earlier this year, practical guide, and says start with identity and device security. These are the two most consistent elements to provide rapid success in terms of Zero Trust adoption. And it is that key element there. It is about adoption, it's culture, it's a mechanism. So it's been a buzzword that's been used in the industry for a while. But in terms of actual explicitly achieving it, there's only a smaller number of organizations have actually got there. There's a large number of organizations considering it and wanting to do it, but are rapidly realizing it's not just about technology. It is actually about fundamental change in the organization's approach. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes in terms of maturity. I was going to say priority, but it's actually about maturity in terms of identifying where you are in this curve. So we've got 4 stages. Stage 0 is the fragmented area. What this is really meaning is that in terms of organizational structure, your identity probably isn't seamless and always organized or could be audited straight away. So typically you might have, say, multiple Active Directories, which are on premise. You will have fragmented or no cloud integration for that from that perspective. We have large numbers of username and passwords. Hopefully those are, we're past this stage in terms of most organizations, but the reality is that quite a few organizations are still down at this level. But it's very much viewed as minimum security. So you need to be able to move up to at least the second stage. And this is where we've actually got things like single sign-on is a method, as was mentioned earlier on by Dave. We can actually consistently make the user experience easier, but we can onboard employees, manage contractors and partners, and we distinguish between those, but we ensure that we're able to identify and verify those organizations. So back at stage 0, it may be your internal IT services, but at stage 1, you need to consider your contractors, and you may have a whole lot of managed service providers who are actually managing various parts of the infrastructure, and therefore they need to be controlled. So for instance, take your Amazon keys. One of the biggest challenges a lot of organizations have is how do you manage cloud administrator level access amongst a range of contractors? And if you end up sharing credentials, which is a really bad thing to be doing, then how do you control those and how do you audit those and provide policies across that environment? So this is what we're really talking about, trying to unify using an identity access management such as Okta's cloud-based system to actually work across your Amazon, your Google, your Azure, your on-prem, and we build up this single hybrid ID approach. And so really the key priorities for most organizations is building that. A quick win on that is actually applying single sign-on and MFA, and that's certainly been mandated by the likes of many recommendations for compliance, and is a good driver. And as a result of doing that, it drives many organizations into consolidating identities. And that really is a key element and helps sort of deploy those elements. One thing I would add to this is specifically, rather than focus on a single multi-factor element to improve your user organizational and expectations, go and consider multiple factors. So as I mentioned, we've got lots of different factors out there today in terms of the biometric, face, touch IDs, pins, tokens. If you actually give users choice, so they've got the ability to have choice across different types of devices, they will actually adopt that a lot quicker and a lot easier. So it's certainly one of the things to be considered as a key there. A lot of organizations have implemented a single sign-on for just employees. But if you actually consider single sign-on, particularly federation for third parties and B2B, then you'll actually improve things considerably in terms of that's concerned as well. So certainly it makes life easier onboarding, offboarding, controlling contractors. They won't have so many passwords or credentials to remember. They just have to remember their own key primary ones. Which then leads us into the area where we can do contextual access and based policies. And this is again where we're consolidating the whole thing. So stage 2 is really pulling it all together. Stage 1 was about doing it potentially in projects or by department, or actually even doing it specifically for core services. A lot of organizations, they focused on compliance standards if they're doing PCI DSS or some other elements of compliance driven capability. There's usually some funds available for it. So from that point of view, once it's done once, the audit guys will actually like it a lot better, and people will actually see the business value out of it, as well as the sort of user experience and adoption. Those are the key drivers. But certainly by the time you get to stage 2, so you can apply those contextual adaptive policies, we can improve things. The key message here, although it should be done earlier than this potentially, is also consider APIs. So up to now, we've been considering just human interaction, but human interaction is actually driven through a lot of scripting and the the adoption of DevOps and software-defined networks and various other things who are all configured through scripts and driven and managed through APIs. APIs is another area that you very definitely have to be sorting out in terms of your zero trust. So having that there. The other part of it is about automating the deprovisioning of levers. Having that joiner, mover, lever process really sorted out across the organization is key. As soon as someone is actually being removed from the organization, you need to be able to disable whatever accesses they've had. Having that centrally managed makes life a lot easier. And it certainly aids in meeting this compliance requirements. Okay, so again, some facts on those. Significant number of organizations are trying to achieve this. So stage 2 is probably the key target for many organizations and certainly helps considerably. But as a result, it's still quite low percentages that have actually got things like fully automated provisioning and deprovisioning, particularly for, say, external third-party B2B users. That's probably a key area. And certainly one of the findings we're aware of is that supply chain is a very, very risk environment. And there's quite a focus for those that are going to be doing phishing and sort of attack surface point of view. So certainly looking after your supply chain area and B2B area is it's a good recommendation to apply that. And maybe it's a good starting point from your zero trust project point of view, because it won't impact the whole organization, but it will be visible to the business and other things. They need to make sure you do get it right. And final, stage 3. Oops, hang on. Did we go for? Yeah. As I say, stringing that all together, it becomes then the user adaptive, user-centric identity. You may have devices for device trust, combinations of users and devices, seamless authentication when using combinations of corporate devices across those seamless zero trust networks or pseudo VPN mechanisms. But the key point here is that you're trying to improve the actual adoption of the services by using risk-based policies to improve the security posture, but equally making it easy for the users to actually adopt and not bypass. I've seen far too often many people just throw something out there and they haven't considered how the administrators and users will actually react to using it. If it's not easy to use, they'll find some other way around it if they can. So again, figures, key one here, and I'm surprised at this actually, but it is a fairly new technology, but it's up and coming. It's very much is the passwordless or multi-factor authentication, and it's multi-factor version 2 or 3, whichever one you can consider. But this is using new standards, things like WebAuthn, FIDO2 as mechanisms. It allows you to choose your Touch ID, your Face ID, other mechanisms as core identity. And it's so much easier to use than, as I say, having to type those long passwords in. But it does require a bit of a change in understanding how the recovery process is set up. So key things here, again, is having those multiple factors available so you can actually verify with one factor through to another factor. You leave your token behind, it's still the same challenge, depending on what the technology is. Okay. So look at that as a holistic picture. It gives you a roadmap to actually working out where you are in this adoption of zero trust. Identity is very much a key part of that, as you can see, but it's identity and identity access management across the whole organization. So it's lifecycle management, it's single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and other core services around the key identity and identifying who is who. Now, some organizations will limit that, as I say, to administrators and call it privileged identity management. But the reality is that privileged identity management is just another part of the whole organization's identity management and should be treated no real different. So in summary, I've got a couple of minutes left before I finish up. we've actually got, from an Okta point of view, the key points and capabilities. It may be a workforce product, but we have other cloud-based capabilities for consumers and B2B, full range. But as I say, single sign-on, adaptive MFA, APIs and API access management is another area that definitely needs looking at. And that's all underpinned by the universal directory, which is the core of the cloud from an Okta point of view. As I say, we support those lifecycle management services. We also have a couple of other services that are fairly new in Okta's term. One is called Advanced Server Access, which is very much part of the Zero Trust capability. And this extends the traditional web and mobile app single sign-on capabilities into supporting single sign-on and to SSH and IDP access for managing your cloud estates and cloud farms. And Access Gateway is the final part of the picture in enabling access down into hybrid IT and traditional legacy apps. So that's Zero Trust and why we need identity from me. Any questions, David? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you. So, have they asked any questions? We have a couple. So let me just flick across. Before I do the questions, let me just remember what I'm doing and start off your first poll question. Hopefully a few more of you are going to jump on now that you realise that there is a prize appropriate for responding to these poll questions. Amazing what a bit of cash always does. And just to reiterate for everybody, regarding the lunch vouchers, if you stay on for the whole session, it's 15, not 50, £15 worth of a voucher that we will help you out with lunch. Jenna said to me earlier, she said, "You've just said £50. I said, "No, I definitely said 15. But just in the interest of clarity, 15. So, first poll is active, and they are responding. So that's all good. So Kevin, really, I think the main question is, and we've kind of had this question feeded in a few times, if you like. I mean, really, it's kind of, where do you start? And, I would even apply this to me, because I've kind of dipped in and out before about looking at bits of infrastructure and gone, yeah, that supports SAML and that supports SAML and that's what. So in theory, and you look at it, you go, yes. Really, where do businesses start with this? Because it can look so intimidating, can't it? And the thing is, it looks so amazing when you meet somebody who logs in with Okta and has this amazing dashboard where they can click on everything and it just signs them in and it's all seamless and it's all beautiful and it's wonderful. Yes. And you try and create it for yourself and it's like, how on earth? So give us a bit of an insight here. Where should you start?
So a good place to start. Well, as I say, that maturity cycle I was just going through is a good starting point to assess from a business perspective. But what you also have to realize is that certainly from a zero trust perspective, it's all about people, process, technology, and data. This is probably the four key areas that you want to really look at. A lot of people focus on the technology. It is about the process and the adoption and from a cultural point of view. But cloud-based identity is actually it's advanced a lot. So if I look back to my previous past, I've been working in identity and access management for about 10, 15 years. Large amount of it was on premise, and it's the old traditional approach of you plan a project for 2 or 3 years just to do the assessment of things. Whereas the Okta approach is very different, which is really pull all the data together that we can get our hands on. So if it's Active Directory, great, drop a couple of agents in there, pull it up to Okta. If it's LDAP, pull it up from there. And then all these cloud services, if you don't control what's actually going on in the cloud, you'll end up with exactly the same scenario of a whole sprawl of different identities. So a lot of organizations beforehand, if you think about it, when you join an organization, you're probably given 4 or 5 different login accounts. And as you move through the organization, you gain some more. So applying single sign-on is a good way to reduce that from the user's perspective. But in terms of planning the project, you definitely need an internal champion, someone who actually wants to achieve it from a business point of view. Unfortunately, it's not a point product deployment. It is a cultural adoption thing, right from HR all the way through to the audit people, and IT are definitely part of it, but they're not the complete answer. You definitely need higher level, project approval from a champion perspective.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think, it's all very well kind of laying down the law and saying, you can't take on a new product or a new vendor or whatever unless it's compatible with blah. But there's also that legacy element, isn't there? And I think, as you say, it needs to be a cultural journey. Businesses need to accept that's where they're going to, because it's so easy to just introduce any solution or product you want into the business, or any way of working you want into the business, and make password management and the security of it the end user problem, isn't it? And it isn't the end user problem, I don't think, anymore. I don't think we can keep pushing it onto the end users, have we? We have to start taking responsibility to provide a good service and a good platform for our users to work in, don't we?
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, you're totally right. The key thing here is it's all about ease of use. So from an Okta point of view, with the integration network, it's all wizard driven, and a lot of it being based upon standards is plug and play these days. But even that, for a lot of organizations deploying, so it's been tested to the extreme in the last 10 weeks. We've seen so many large organizations rapidly go from, say, 20 or 30% of remote users out to 99% of users. And achieving that, yes, okay, expanding VPN is one way to do that, but for large organizations, in some cases, it just wasn't possible. So having a large number of users move to cloud was a key driver, and just getting on top of that from a compliance point of view. So the plug and play capability, and we've certainly had feedback from some significant customers that say, if it didn't have Okta, we just couldn't have done this, because it's so easy to do, to connect up the additional capacity or get that SAML connection or the OpenID connection for users to use, and then apply single sign-on policies. So in terms of simple of use, it is both an end user experience as well as an administrator's experience of being very positive.
And I think, what you're saying there is a key point. And, we do need to treat I see Okta used by a lot of businesses as a customer. I see Okta used by a lot of businesses. But I think sometimes we forget to treat our internal staff as customers and to concentrate on providing, a good service to them as well.
Yeah.
I think the one other question, which is kind of and I think you've kind of covered this, but I'll be that antagonistic IT administrator for a minute. I don't need Okta because I've already got MFA implemented across my estate, so I'm secure. That because I'll be honest, I do hear that, and it just it puts my back right up. I have to admit, I'm sure it does yours as well. So, what is the official diplomatic answer to that, Kevin? Before we move on to the next section.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, certainly from an Okta point of view, we work with a wide range of MFA tools. Not only the Okta MFA verify and push, but we can actually integrate with those third-party ones as well. So if you've got existing MFA in place, that's great. But think about the long term. If they're traditional hard-based tokens, they're either going to need to be replaced, renewed, and other things of that nature. So you can work with that sort of migration as opposed to a big bang approach. But it's good the fact you've got MFA in place. That's super. It's one step up from a large number of other people who don't have it. But when it comes to integration of, if it's on-prem, how do you integrate that into a cloud service? That's usually where the big challenge comes in. And that's where Okta really has the benefit. We can actually integrate on-premise capability. 98% of people have got an Active Directory account. That's where their prime credentials come from. Push those out to the cloud. You need federation capability. We make that simple, but equally applying it and bringing in the MFA into that sequence is just as easy.
Yeah, I do see, a very big difference between, businesses that have applied MFA to everything. And actually it gets to a point, because for a lot of the time when you have MFA, you still need the password, and then MFA is a challenge that goes alongside it.
Yeah.
So rather than make life easier, MFA makes life harder, which makes people detest security even more, which is completely not what we're trying to achieve here.
Very much so. That's down to the user experience. And as I say, that's the key thing, really. So again, supporting that ability to choose. If the end user's got the ability to choose an appropriate MFA that's acceptable as the right level of security and trust, then it makes life easier for the user. But equally, from the administrator point of view, it means they're actually being used in policies and people are not trying to bypass those.
Yeah, no, okay. And say by making the end user experience good, we make it simple as well. And by making it simple, it means people appreciate it and use it more. And that can only make your business inherently more secure.
Yeah. But if people want more information about this, there's a white paper on the Zero Trust from the Okta website perspective, which covers most of what I've covered today.
Okay, well, let's review the poll questions quickly. So I've pressed them down now. So what, if anything, is holding back your Zero Trust project? Our two main answers were business case justification for funding or knowledge and experience to deliver business outcome. I guess the questions we had were really around the knowledge and experience. How would you actually go about doing it? But business case justification for funding, I suppose, is quite difficult because a lot of businesses don't always make the space for internal staff experience. They more at the nuts and bolts of functionality, and they don't always spend money on that experience, do they? But I think that is, you know, interesting that those were the two. So funding and knowledge and experience. If we move across onto the next one and just have a quick look at what we got for that. Next poll, what are you considering a zero trust project? They weren't sure, is the main one. 8% yes, 25% no, not sure, 67%. So there's a lot of not sure. Right. There's a lot of space for us to work on them there, Kevin.
Undecided, yes, very definitely room to work on.
Yeah, it's definitely something for us to work on. And then last but not least, is identity management part of your zero trust project? Straight 50-50 split, yes or no? Sorry, yes and not sure, 50-50 split. And then,
right. Okay.
You know, very small amount of no. So I think there's a large degree of we like the idea, but we're not sure.
Yes, so room for improvement.
Yeah, definitely something for us to follow up with people.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin, look, thank you very much for your time this morning. It's really appreciated. We will move on. So first things first, a little bit of housekeeping for you. Our next winner from the set of polls that we did at the end of the Palo Alto session was Alistair McKinnon. So I will announce the winner from the polls on this one on the next session. I think I already covered the housekeeping that we needed to do in terms of clarifying the voucher value for lunch, which is 15. In terms of the prize for doing the final surveys, we have come up with an idea on that. In terms of reading. So what we're thinking is you've got two options here. You've got a slightly more techie, electronic-y option, and then you've got a slightly more fun, maybe keep you busy at the weekend type option. So it will be a choice of either an Amazon Echo Show 8 or a Google Nest Hub, depending on which ecosystem you happen to be sat in. Or if you don't want something like that and you want something different, then there will be, you know, the large size Lego BB-8 available as a choice if you want something to keep you occupied. And it's used to lock yourself away from the kids, or maybe something to give to the kids to keep them occupied, depending on age, over the course of a weekend. So that is the prize choices. So I think that's all my housekeeping done for this session. So what I will do, without further ado, is I will hand over to Zeki to do the Crowdstrike piece for us. Zeki, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you everyone for allowing me to be here today at Bytes virtual conference. My name is Zeki Tereddi. I'm a technology strategist at Crowdstrike, focusing on overall security strategy. And of course, today I'm here to talk about why endpoint security should move to the cloud. Now, when we look at this question, the most important thing to think about is why. Why should we be harnessing the cloud? The cloud has so many unique capabilities that allows us to do things such as huge amounts of scalability. But why should we be harnessing it for security? And I think, first of all, to do that, we need to understand, the issues that we as organizations have from a security perspective. And especially today, when we look into what our unique environment looks like, what our environments are happening and what our actual workforce looks like. Now, we've gone through some strange times over the last 3 months, but the reality is, coming out of it, our workforce is going to look completely different. For most organizations, we'll be moving into this new hybrid workforce, where some people will be raring to go straight back to the offices. But for few, maybe the working from home environment has worked for them. They've realized that it's better for a work-life balance. HR organizations are going to quickly understand that maybe we should be having more remote workers. In some cases, people will be opting to work from home, or even take more of a hybrid approach where they want to go from work from the park or coffee shop and have that choice of what their working environment looks like every single day. And this is going to be the new workforce for us. And this is from a security perspective, as security practitioners, as individuals who are there to defend our networks. We need to be very, very aware that the security implications will become varied. And we need to understand those security implications to make sure we're putting in the right technology to protect our new employees. Now, the reality is, as our hybrid workforce evolves, the adversary is very, very much aware of this and is very, very much watching our organizations. Very much understanding what potential loopholes or gaps in our security postures that may be opening, and they're very much raring to go to utilize these gaps against us. So when we talk about security and harnessing the cloud and making sure it's available to our new workforce, pre-pandemic as well as post-pandemic, we must also understand the types of techniques that could actually completely disrupt the way that we work. And there's very one simple technique that we're seeing huge amounts of today that can easily destroy any type of organization. I think for most, if we saw this image on our systems, it wouldn't be a good start of a day. This is possibly one of the most scariest things that an IT or security defender, a CISO or COO could ever see in their organization. And what we need to do is actually, for most, this is the start of a long process, but the reality is there are a lot of things that we can do as defenders to stop a ransomware attack actually happening within our organization. So I want to take a moment and just think, what would you do in this situation? Would you first of all go out and get help? Or would you just think straight away, we need to pay the ransom and just get our organization up and going once again? To really understand that question and the real steps we should be taking, we need to actually go right to the real beginning. The reality is the beginning does not start at the ransomware message on our screen. It starts a lot earlier. It starts with the adversary, the e-crime, the e-criminal organization picking out their target. Unfortunately, if we look into this infographic, and this is information relating to the first quarter of 2020, and you'll notice that we've outlined the number of the top adversary threat actors that we at Crowdstrike have been tracking as the first quarter of 2020 against the multiple sectors. You'll notice we refer to actor groups as Chilima or Kitten or Panda, and these relate to nation state actors. But the last array are what we call spiders. These are e-criminal organizations. And if you look at the actual sectors they're targeting, pretty much every single organization is a potential victim. It's a potential target. From there, they utilize a number of techniques to be able to establish a connection within the organization. Utilizing things like such as brute forcing, your RDP. A lot of organizations, to make sure they're able to successfully operate during the lockdown, have opened up RDP connections to resources that typically normally would be completely isolated. The threat actors are aware of this, and this is a technique they utilized way before the pandemic. And again, it's something that is becoming highly successful for them during the lockdown. For organizations that may be harnessing, large amounts of network tool sets or network isolation, the use of DNS tunneling allows them to create successful command and control out of your network. They're also extremely clever from a social engineering aspect, compromising legitimate WordPress websites to make sure that their LER documents, or when they target your victims, so that the victims, it looks as legitimate as possible. They are harnessing very successful and sophisticated, dropper builders and distribution services, making sure that when they target those victims, potentially your employees, they have a high success rate. But they also use techniques like email thread hijacking. It's a very simple technique, but it allows an e-criminal actor to utilize some social engineering techniques, such as simply opening up an email thread that's already open to the new victim and respond to it, making it look like the communication is coming from a legitimate user who the new victim communicates with on a frequent basis. These are very simple techniques, but the reality is in a pre-pandemic and lockdown period, as well as post-pandemic, these are techniques that are highly successful. From there, once the criminal actor has got to their target, is in an organization, they want to move laterally. They want to be able to get as much of a widespread of the organization as possible. To do this, they're not utilizing sophisticated, custom-built, zero-day tools. They're using off-the-shelf products. They're using tools like a PowerShell Empire or Crowdstrike. These are legitimate pen testing tools. In the case of Crowdstrike, you actually have to buy a license. But of course, these tools have been leaked in the past, and they're freely available to anyone to pick up and utilize themselves. They also use legitimate tools your administrators most likely use every single day. PS Exec, Process Dump, PC Hunter, these are all tool sets that are utilized legitimately. But guess what? These tools are great to be harnessed illegitimately by the threat actors. And stage 3 is patience. And this is something we need to be very much aware of, especially as we've gone from a lockdown period back into our offices. The reality is the sophisticated attacker is silent. You don't just get a ransomware notification on day one. The reality is, on average, they're within an organization for 95 days, over 3 months. During this time, they're learning about your network. They're getting as far and wide across your organization as possible. They want to understand what your critical systems are. They want to understand your databases, the workings of your organization, your financial structure. They are gaining intelligence information about your network. And the reason they do this is so when they do hit the big red ransomware button, they know that they're going to be able to take out majority of your organization. And they can't do this the second they're in the organization. It takes time. But they're also waiting for the right moment as well. So the reality is we had up to 3 months to catch this attacker, but they went silent, utilizing the tools that your administrator uses, using off-the-shelf pen testing tools. They're able to keep dormant for a long period of time. And then, of course, when the time is right, it's time to encrypt your systems. It's quite a simple process. They start deploying the ransomware, usually by accessing your Active Directory systems, your DCs, your domain controllers, start communicating, utilizing WMI, again, a legitimate tool in your network. They'll enable persistence, so make sure that if your systems are restarted or you try and reboot, it'll always be there. They then start removing security tools. So those antivirus tools you utilize, your backup software, your administration tools like SCCM, guess what? They get removed and stop working. And then once that's done, once they're prepared, they start encrypting removable and fixed drives. And then once that's done, they start encrypting the network shares in your environment. From here, you have an environment that is completely encrypted, your security tools no longer working, and your backup software not able to be utilized to have a quick, swift recovery. And of course, we're back to the very, very first image. And now we understand the true processes. And the reality is, these events don't just start when we see the ransomware image. These are very, very monotonous, so very, very sophisticated tasks being done months before we ever knew about it. On top of that, we now potentially have an invoice to pay of a ransomware payment. Unfortunately, the rise of ransomware and interest of what we call big game hunting has meant that the ransomware payments have hugely increased. The e-crime actors are slightly nice. They always make sure that it's a ransomware payment total that is actually able to be paid by the organization. But it doesn't mean it's going to be something that you can pay and successfully be able to run your business from there. We've seen ransomware up to over 12.5 million, but of course, for smaller organizations, we've seen values as such as a few $1,000s or $10,000. It's going to be an amount that's respected to your size of your organization. But we need to remember it's not just about paying the ransom. You can't just pay the ransom and get your software and your environment back up. It doesn't magically just rework again. All you get is a decryption key. So you need to then create your own software to be able to recover those encrypted files. You also have to remember that you've just been targeted. You need to understand, how did the actual criminal actor get into your organization? What techniques did they use? Did they open any holes to make sure they can come back in whenever they wanted to? You need to do a full forensic investigation and fully recover from any vulnerabilities in your environment. You need to get your organization, your network back up and running. And of course, once you've done all this, you need to make sure you've invested in the right tools to make sure this never happens, to make sure you knew about this problem when they initially targeted you rather than 3 months later down the line. To take this into more of a, understand what's actually happening today, I wanted to look into some of the stats that we're capturing from the first quarter of 2020. So everyone actually realizes the reality of the problem. We talked about all the different sectors being targeted, but we're seeing a huge increase and uptick in e-criminal activity in the first quarter of 2020. We saw 83% of the activity of targeting organizations to be from e-crime actors and 17% from nation state. If we look and compare this to the last quarter of 2019, it was 29% targeted state crime activity and only 71 e-crime. But we're also seeing a huge uptick in non-targeted malware. And this is where criminal actors not specifically finding a victim, but still doing like a spray and pray methodology. So trying to target as many people as possible with their malware, and then once they get a victim, then suddenly honing in and targeting them very, very specifically. So it's a hybrid approach to targeting the organizations. It's not just all people. They use the automation of sending as many spam emails or mal spam to as many people as possible. And then once they've actually got someone who's clicked on it and it's successfully implanted their network, they then start understanding who it is and how they should take their next steps. But we also see in nation states, we saw there was quite low numbers for the first quarter of 2020. The reality is the nation state actor is still as active. They are still working, but again, they're highly targeted and only focusing on the types of organizations that they have interest in. The reality is the volume of nation state activity has not changed. So it's still a real problem to those organizations who are likely to be targeted due to geopolitical or intellectual property theft. So to secure our network, we don't just need to secure our endpoints. We need to secure our workloads, our mobiles, our servers. The reality is, as we move into this hybrid workforce, every single device, every single technology we're harnessing to power our business needs to be protected. And by utilizing a security technology that harnesses the cloud, it means we are able to protect every single component of our digital workforce. The threat is real. The reality is the types of threats targeting our businesses are far and wide. We're dealing with commodity malware. We're still dealing with script kiddies. But at the same time, we're still dealing with e-crime, sophisticated threat actors that understand the weaknesses of our business, understand the risks that we have taken, and are very happy to utilize these risks against our organizations. By harnessing the cloud, we make sure we protect all these different environments and make sure we protect all these environments against the huge wider variety of different attack techniques that we're seeing every single day. Now, at CrowdStrike, we utilize a very, very simple kind of rule to make sure that we are building the best technology, but most importantly, working with our customers, working with our partners to make sure they are fully protected. And we use a simple rule of how long it takes us to detect, investigate, and remediate. At the end of 2019, we ran a survey across over 1,200 individuals, ranging from SMB to large-scale enterprises, to understand how quickly does it take them to detect, investigate, and remediate. On average, we found out that organizations take 120 hours to initially detect an incident happening within their organization. It takes them 10 hours to investigate, and then 31 hours to then remediate the incident. We know we're up against a varied threat landscape, And unfortunately, these times are not acceptable to make sure that we're able to respond to incidents in a timely manner. And this is where, with CrowdStrike, we believe with a cloud delivered platform, there's a number of capabilities we can harness to make sure those response times are at a minimum. And the most important is be able to detect at speed. As you saw, from the previous information, on average, we see organizations being breached for up to 95 days until they realize, and that's way too late. By harnessing the cloud and a cloud-delivered endpoint security technology, a cloud workload security technology, we can harness tools such as machine learning, utilize the data that's been delivered off every single one of our customers to understand what is legitimate behavior looks like. We're very quickly able to identify and predict when malicious activity is happening before it actually happens. We also can use this data as a whole to be able to derive what an indicator of an attack actually looks like. So rather than just looking at our environment on its own, utilize crowdsourced intelligence information to understand how new attack techniques are being derived, and be able to put automatic protection and prevention onto other organizations. And of course, by having a cloud native architecture allows us to have very, very quick scalability, be able to protect all the environments on our network, not just the ones that are on premise. We also need to be able to investigate at speed. Investigations need data. It needs context. We need to be able to correlate this information rapidly with other sources. We need to be able to take the data that we're seeing and instantaneously correlate it with threat intelligence to provide immediate attribution. Unfortunately, today, with the technologies that we harness, these steps are very, very hard and complex. They can take huge amounts of time. Just to be able to try and get access to the information we need could take several hours or several days. By having all the data in a central location in the cloud, the data is at our fingers, automatically being correlated and brought to us when we need it. So we're not having to go and do more searches or pull forensics or pull further logs. We have the data we need within a single user experience to make sure that we understand the true events and what's occurring, and be able to make sure we take the right next step. And the most important step is remediation and containment. Unfortunately, we can't do remediation or containment without the steps before. And as well, when we come to remediation, we need to make sure we are doing the right job. If we don't have the right detail and do an incorrect remediation, that means the attack can still carry on. By having the right context, by having the right information, it means we can quickly move into the most important step of remediation. But as well as that, remediation brings problems to organizations. In many cases, an incident responder can't go and kill a process or remove a registry persistence address that's been created. They have to open a ticket or install another tool set or add processes and workflows that again add more time onto the remediation efforts. Or what happens when we actually have someone working at home and we just start our SCCM or our response tools are not able to connect to the system? Maybe they haven't connected via VPN, so we are not able to have visibility. We know that a system is infected and potentially coming back into the office, but our tools are failing us. By having cloud-delivered products, we actually allow us to have full connection, full visibility of our hybrid workforce, no matter where they are. As well as that, it means that no matter where they're currently situated, we can fully remediate them quickly and efficiently, either through automatic processes or through manual processes through our likes of our real-time response capability. And overall, by taking these components through a cloud-delivered platform, we derive what we call the 1-10-60 rule, something that we should strive towards. The reality is, in some cases, we can do this instantaneously, this whole process in a few seconds. But we, as security practitioners, also understand that in some cases, we are dealing with a highly trained nation state or a highly trained, sophisticated criminal actor when we need to have further functionalities and capabilities. And this is where, if we can detect within a single minute, be able to fully investigate the activities and understand every single part of the actual incident within 10 minutes, we are able to successfully remediate and contain within a 60-minute window. Making sure that no matter the type of threat actor we're dealing with, our organizations are safe. No matter where our workforce are currently operating, we know that our network is fully safe. Thank you. And I'll hand it back over to David.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that. It's this whole topic, and I'm a little bit of a nerd, but it does absolutely fascinate me. And you know, the concept that we're dealing with nation state issues in regular businesses now, and trying to deal with that kind of stuff is it never ceases to fascinate me, the level of stuff that we are having to deal with and having to pick up. We have had a couple of questions through. I'll come on to those in a second. Just started the poll up. Let's see if people are already clicking on it. Yeah, people are already clicking on the poll, so that's great. So we've got three poll questions to do here, guys, to run through. I'll try and leave them up for about a minute on each one. Just very, very quickly while we're doing that, our last poll winner for the last one was James Barlow. So James, well done. That was another £50 to you for that. And thank you for the couple of questions you put in as well. We'll come on to those later on the Q&A session. The third poll for this one will be £75. So apologies for looking down. I've got notes I've been given that I have to read. Yeah, that'll be the prize for these ones. So really, you know, the main question we've had a couple of different versions for it is, you know, during COVID-19 and this period we're going through, is ransomware the only threat that has risen during that time period, or is there other issues that have come up?
Yeah, definitely. And if we kind of look at it in a holistic view, and firstly focus on nation states. You know, as I mentioned previously, the nation state activity is pretty much the exact same amount of volume and the same amount of targeted attacks as we've seen in previous years. So that's definitely something that's not going away. Of course, with COVID-19, there's a lot of focus points on biomedical research areas, but there's also interest in politics, and there's a lot of attempted IP theft as well. As different changes happening around COVID-19. On the e-crime perspective, as again you saw from the numbers, it is just evolving, and we're seeing more and more threat actors appearing. What's interesting is we're actually seeing a lot of what we probably classify as being not as mature criminal actors leveraging platforms, so ransomware as a service platforms, so they can start getting into what we call big game hunting, so targeting businesses to try and for monetization. We've also seen the evolution of the ransomware, so it's not just about attacking organizations and encrypting their systems. We've also seen adversary groups actually exfiltrate confidential and sensitive company data, as well as encrypting their environment. And the reason why they do this is in case that the organization just simply goes, hey, you know what, we're fine with it, we can rebuild. But the second that the data's involved, they're hoping they'll use this as a way to make sure that the victim pays up the ransom. So, it's definitely evolved.
Yeah, and actually that was going to be one of the kind of follow-up statements that I was going to say that we're certainly seeing in our incident response stuff and things like that, is that businesses by and large have done what they needed to do, and they've responded to the ransomware threat by accepting that although they can put many different layers of security around their systems, that ultimately there is always a chance that it's going to get in, and therefore having robust backups that can be applied at a high rate of knots. So having tools that will catch the ransomware before it encrypts everything, and having the ability to restore the data quickly and guaranteeing that restore as an effective way of dealing with ransomware. So actually what we're starting to see now is they don't want the money for the key to decrypt the data. They don't even care about decrypting the data, because they know you can get the data back. what they want the money for is to not release the data on the dark web so that you can avoid a fine from the ICO or whatever. They're actually blackmailing you to release the data rather than caring about whether you get the data back or not, because they know you can get the data back, because most businesses have robust procedures for that. And we are also seeing an element, I'm not sure if you touched on this, but if there is something malicious on your network, you really should get a business involved from an incident response point of view, because if you cut the connections to the outside world on it, it might just take your network down as its last hurrah on its way out if it loses communication, command and control. I mean, certainly those are areas that we're seeing an evolution. Is that mirrored by what you guys are seeing as a vendor?
Yeah, exactly. We deal with quite a large amount of incident response engagements as part of our organization, and one thing that I would always say is don't just treat this as being we pay the ransom and we're done. Remember all the steps that occurred previously. If you take into the kind of scenario that I walked through as part of the presentation, there's an opportunity to defend yourselves at many, many different areas, and that's the areas we should be focusing on. Again, these are sophisticated criminals. These are people we're dealing with here. This is not automation or just a piece of malware that just goes and does what it's been programmed to do. They are able to change to the environment. So if you suddenly see an IT administrator realize that the backup software is not working and enable it again, they'll just go back and disable it. And one of the biggest things we see is having online or digital backup systems that can be easily shut down by a third party who has full access to your network isn't going to help you when you need time of need. And make sure you have got offline backup processes as well, or disconnected backup process as well, because that can be extremely beneficial if you're just relying on a piece of software on every single endpoint or your critical assets.
No, absolutely. Okay, all right, well, thank you for that. Let's just quickly review the poll questions. I know, guys, there's you guys probably don't notice it, but we do. There is a slight time delay between us speaking and then when I click on things for the poll. So I'm just going to quickly review the poll questions with Zeki, but the one we're talking about might not be the one on the screen. So apologize if there's anything too confusing about that. But I'll be honest, it confuses me. So if it's confusing me, it could possibly be confusing you. The first one we did was, are you and will you be preparing your organization to work securely long-term away from the office? Overwhelmingly, yes, was the answer to that. Nobody said no. And I think possibly one person said not sure, possibly because they're waiting from an edict from higher up on that one. So that was the first poll result. Second question, obviously, we asked was around dwell times. What is the average dwell time? They overwhelmingly went for 95 days. Was that the right answer?
It was correct, yes.
Excellent, always helps. And last but not least, what does Mimikatz allow people to do? They've gone for dump system credentials as their predominant one.
Correct,
yeah, we're happy with that. Okay, guys, absolutely fantastic. Zeki, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you back for the Q&A shortly. We are 3 minutes ahead of schedule, Trevor, so I apologise. They've all pinched your time that you could eagerly see at the start of the day. But I will hand over to Trevor from Illumio now to go through the last section of slides before we do our Q&A at the end. Trevor, it's over to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you absolutely fine. Sorry, I muted myself out too quickly. Yeah, can you?
No, it's always worth a check. So thank you and welcome. As said, my name is Trevor Deering. I'm the EMEA Director of Technology for Illumio. And probably Illumio's the name of the bunch today that you probably haven't heard of or haven't heard too much of. And I guess our business really grew on the change in the concept of the edge. And I think what we've heard today is very much the fact that the edge is sort of blurring, and we're seeing lots of things that reflect that. And it's actually true. In fact, we are users of of products from the previous three speakers. So so we're effectively eating our own dog food on a lot of this sort of activity. Because the thing that's happening with with the, I guess with the applications that we see, is very much a shift that happened a while ago. So I guess it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, we saw a shift from the concept of an application as a monolith. So a server that had the application, the operating system, the database, the storage, all sitting together, to a model that's very much more around microservices. And this happened sort of with IBM's services-oriented architecture, with .NET from Microsoft, and various things like this. So the reason for this is that rather than having dedicated resources allocated to a single application, we could start to share resources, we could start to control them individually, and it made the whole thing that much more efficient. But it actually caused some problems, because what happened is effectively that the attack surface gets bigger and bigger. So instead of, a single, a single coastline, so something like the US, you end up with a coastline that's full of islands and inlets and things like that, a bit like Norway. And if we think about it, the coastline of North America is about 20,000 kilometers, whereas the coastline of Norway, even though the country is much smaller, is up to 100,000 kilometers if you take in all the islands, all the inlets and everything like that. So by changing the architecture, we've got to a point where actually the attack surface gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But the reality is things don't live on an island. And so we need to be able to, address the issues and how to secure all of these individual resources, because they, need to be able to communicate potentially with not necessarily everyone, but everyone within their application or everyone within the resources that are required. But we need to stop any communication happening outside of that. And, one of the things is that for many, many years, and for me growing up, we dealt with the 7-layer OSI model. And this was the Bible. This is everything that, that everyone did. And really we started at the bottom, the physical layer. So, is it coax? Is it twisted pair? Is it unshielded twisted pair, or fiber or something else? And then we had, Ethernet, token ring, Omninet, a whole series of things above that, a whole range of network protocols, IP, XNS, IPX. And then, transport layer, the session layer, which no one really understood, presentation, and then the application on top. So we were dealing with a whole series of different things that we had to sort of plug together and make work. Whereas now that's changed. We've got to the point now where we have a model where the infrastructure is pretty standard. So everything is some version of Ethernet, and pretty much all protocols are IP. So it gives us some standardization. And so what that allows us to do is, regardless of where we are, it allows us to microsegment, either host-based, firewall, or network. We can standardize on content security. So we talk about, behavior analytics, intrusion prevention, EDR, all those sort of things. And then we deal with identity. And so what we end up with here is fundamentally that the piece on top becomes decoupled from the network. So the edge, which was the network edge, doesn't exist anymore. The edge is now around identity, it's around security, and it's around segmentation. So I suppose a really good example of this is containers. I'm not talking about Docker or Kubernetes or anything like that at the moment. This is purely genuine shipping containers that we see all over the place, discarded by the side of the road, that you can buy for about $5 now on the secondhand market. Containers are everywhere. And if you think about it, we could load the contents of our house into a container, and that container can then move on a ship, it can move on a truck, or it can move on a train, or almost anything else. So we have a situation here where we have an enormous amount of flexibility. And what that really gives us is the factor that the transport is now disconnected from the network. But we need to be able to do that right across the board. And at the moment, traditionally, a lot of the ways that applications are grouped or segment is very reliant on the network. And that makes it actually difficult when you're moving from your own data center to the cloud, to containers and things like that. So we need an architectural shift. We need to completely separate segmentation from the network architecture. And this removes the dependency on location, it removes the dependency on the platform, and it just simplifies things completely. Because if you think about it, what we're trying to do is stop breaches. And everything that we've spoken about this morning is about how to either prevent breaches, prevent bad things happening if breaches occur. The whole thing is what we're actually trying to achieve. And I guess one of the ways that we do that is to understand how they occur. So everyone, we talk about things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is probably what most people use now. But unfortunately, because it's so busy, it actually doesn't make as good a PowerPoint slide as the traditional kill chain. And so, if we talk about and look at the 7 stages of a cyber attack, starting with, reconnaissance, so finding out where we can go, what we can do, weaponization, turning that information into a bad thing, the delivery of that malware, the exploitation, the installation of that malware on machines, the command and control process, and then actually the action. And what we've heard this morning is techniques to really do a lot to stop 2 to 7. And so I want to look at, fundamentally, I want to have a quick look at number 1, at reconnaissance. And so, if you think about a lot of what's going on with the reconnaissance phase, we see the attacker comes in, and as we said, he'll drop a piece of code onto a machine that'll sit there 95 days and will gradually look around the whole network, trying to understand which machine is vulnerable, which machine it can actually drop onto to actually do things, and then be able to execute the attack. Now, the challenge, the thing is, we have to be able to stop this, because we have to be able to stop that piece of code moving around the infrastructure. And so what we can do is we can start to segment that network or segment that environment. And again, this is regardless of whether it's cloud or containers or any other sort of environment. So fundamentally, if we can contain that reconnaissance phase to a single environment, then actually that 95 days of being on the network is not very productive to the attacker. And so we can keep things separate. So, you may want to obviously separate things like your production network from your development network. You may want to separate certain areas where there's specific intellectual property. You may want to separate, if you're in the finance, things like your Swift environment and your PCI environment. And in fact, a lot of the things that come out from like the NIST directive, from the cyber, the CAF from the National Cybersecurity Center, they include requirements to actually be able to segment your environment. And so being able to do this is actually quite a good thing, because the more we can segment, the more we can actually reduce the attack surface. So if you think about, as a whole, we have our flat open network that we had before. And so there's several things you can do. We could, for instance, segment by environment. So as we said, we could separate our production network from our test network. We could separate, various groups, finance from HR. We could equally ring fence applications. So we can take our CRM application and put a circle around that and keep that as a segmented environment. Or we can do tier segmentation. So fundamentally, we can separate and control access from our web tier to our application tier to our database, et cetera, et cetera. And the reality is, if you're doing all 3 of these things, then that's what generally is referred to now as microsegmentation. Microsegmentation has recently become a big source of communication and interest amongst a lot of the market. So the press, the analysts, consultants, things like this. And in fact, you can go one stage further. You can segment by individual processes, and people generally refer to that as nanosegmentation. But the reality is that the smaller the attack surface is, the more protected you are. Now, that all seems intuitive, and probably, if we thought about it, we go, yep, that's a fairly obvious thing. But the reality is we need to actually understand what effect it has. As here, Lord Kelvin says, if you can't measure it, you can't control it. So we brought in some experts to help us actually measure the efficacy of this. And we brought in a company of red team company called Bishop Fox. And if you go to the Illumio website, you can actually download this report and sort of read in full detail how it worked and what we did. But fundamentally, what we did is we got the team to be able to measure the time it took to capture the crown jewels. We didn't put any sophisticated security on the system itself. We purely measured this using segmentation. So we took a control, which is, no segmentation. And then we added some extra layers on this. We did the environmental segmentation, is use case 1. Then we tested it with application ring fencing. And then we tested it with tier-based segmentation. And we did this for 100 workloads, 500 workloads, and 1,000 workloads. So it obviously took some time to set this all up, to do it, to reset it, to run it again. And the results we got were fundamentally, this is around the time to completion, so the time taken to find the trophy targets. So unsurprisingly, the more workload you have, the longer the time takes. So actually, it's interesting that a smaller environment is more susceptible to some of these attacks than a very, very large environment, purely because the time it takes to find the trophy targets. But fundamentally using use case 1, it took 3 times as long than it did in the completely open environment. With use case 2, took 4.5 times as long, and with use case 3, it took 9 times as long. And the numbers down the side, it took up to 25 hours to be able to capture the information on the large network using use case 3. So you can start to see how applying segmentation and microsegmentation into this environment can help us to actually secure the environment and protect it while all of the other things are working alongside that. So this is not your only solution. This is the solution that you would put in alongside Crowdstrike and Palo Alto Networks and Okta to be able to secure and help your environments. So the key to doing this really is that segmentation must be consistent. We spoke about decoupling segmentation from the network. And to be able to apply these rules, you need to be able to do it across every environment. As we said, public cloud, data center, virtualized networks, different hypervisors, different operating systems, bare metal servers, the whole thing. Because if you create an environment where something is excluded, then you're going to break the whole segmentation model. And the good news is you actually probably own all the firewalls you need to do this, because within each operating system, there is a firewall, and these firewalls have forwarding tables. And those forwarding tables control the information you need for microsegmentation, which is basically you need the source address, you need the destination address, and you need the service that you're actually going to use to get there. Because that is fundamentally what controls the access from one resource to another. And so by doing that, we can actually apply some technology. And this is where Illumio comes in, because the reality is if you had to individually manage those firewalls and forwarding tables, it would take forever and it is really difficult and you can make mistakes. So the way that Illumio works is that we put a very small agent called a virtual enforcement node onto each workload. And what that does is that interacts with the onboard firewall. We also have what is effectively a brain called the policy compute engine. And so the VENs collect information about who's communicating with who and sends that back to the policy compute engine, which creates a map. And I'll show you roughly what that map looks like in a second. But we also take data from things like NetFlow from the network, from AWS and Azure flow logs from the cloud, and a number of other sources. And then we also overlay that with vulnerability data from products like Tenable to be able to produce a vulnerability map. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So what we end up with is a map. And what we're looking at here is a map that is separated by locations, by the application, and by the tier that it exists in. And you'll see that there are a number of green lines and a number of red lines. So the green lines are basically where there is communication between different services and different resources and workloads, where there is a rule that's allowed, that's created. And the red lines show where there is communication, where there is no rule allowed. And if we don't enable that, then fundamentally the communication won't happen. And so what you can see is that each of the workloads has a label. And so what we're looking at here is the name or the role of that device. And then the other label is fundamentally the application, the environment, and the location of that device. So we take the label information from a configuration management database like ServiceNow or something like that, and then we apply those names and those labels to each of the workloads. And in fact, we can take those labels and that label information and we can map it to things like dynamic address groups within Palo Alto Networks firewalls. So it gives us that capability to start to have this commonality of information right across the network. And so what happens is, based on that map, we then can automatically create policies that enable us to enforce that communication. So that's pushed down the virtual enforcement node on each workload, then drives the forwarding table in the application to apply those rules, so that only the communication happens between those workloads. And this happens, again, this is very simple to do. So here we have the screen that you'll see. If we click on application ring fencing, you can see the connections and the rules that it creates. So we can create that application ring fence literally by clicking at group level, click save, and away we go. Or we can be more sophisticated and we can go down to the to the tier level. So we click on tier level, and then on the right hand side you'll see the rules that are created. You'll see that they are in natural language, easy to understand rules, and we can choose to enforce those or not enforce those. And the other thing that you'll see there is that it talks about a vulnerability score. So you remember he said about the fact that we import data from Tenable, but also Qualys and Rapid7. And so what we do is we take the CVSS score from those services, and we map that with an exposure score. So based on what the vulnerability score is, how many services is it connected to, how exposed is it to the outside world, and things like that. And with a simple slide control, we can then apply and change the rules to control that vulnerability. So that gives us just even more control over what is actually being, what is connected to what. So basically, we have now separated and abstracted the policy control and from the network, and it basically now follows the workload. So we can apply different levels. We can apply, as we said, environmental segmentation, application ring fencing, tier segmentation, or process segmentation. And as we said, we've now accurately tested the efficacy of each, and we've seen the impact that we have. We haven't tested the process segmentation because that may just take the red team far too long to actually break into that environment. And we can see that we can now control access between each of those workloads to reduce the reconnaissance phase, and also to control and segment individual environments within our own computing world. So hopefully that's given you a view of what we do. Obviously, there's a lot more information. If you visit illumio.com or you talk to Bytes, then they can give you more information about what we do and how it actually all fits into the world. So with that, hopefully I haven't taken too much time, and pass back to David.
Thank you for that, Trevor. I mean, I think as you said up front, you know, a lot of people probably haven't heard of Illumio, but it is a fascinating piece of technology, and it is a very different way of looking at things and thinking about things. So it certainly adds to the mix of this. So I will quickly put the first of your poll questions up so that people can start responding to that. Bits of housekeeping. So Kathy Buckley has got the £75 voucher for the last set of polls. This set of polls have a £100 voucher associated with them. So get clicking away. I can see a few people are already starting to answer. So definitely worth having. Let me just check I've got the right one up. Yes, I have, so that's fine. Okay, so in terms of questions, we had a few questions about the product, and I know you kind of tried to cover it off, Trevor, in as much, shall we call it, simple detail as was possible. Is it easy to get the alerts? Obviously, we've got the product, we've got all the alerts and telemetry inside it. Is it easy to get the alerts out into your SIM system and to integrate it into the wider infrastructure?
Yes, we have an app that we can install that allows us to take that information and then forward it up to SIM systems like QRadar and Splunk and these sort of environments. So it is quite key. In fact, when we're doing the configuration, we have 3 modes. One which is fundamentally that we can build the policies and they're not enforced anywhere. They're not, they're sort of built on the map information. We have a test mode which takes the real life traffic information, and it's like a what if. We sort of see what's going on, and at that phase, even though we're not enforcing anything or doing anything on the network, if things occur that generate an alert, then that can be fed up and seen within your SIM system. And then we have an enforce phase where we turn it on and it actually goes and does the enforcement. So the integration with the SIM is actually very important all the way through that process.
Okay, cool, understood. And when I'm out talking to potential customers about Illumio and different businesses, I kind of probably describe it slightly incorrectly when I'm out there looking for the opportunities. For you, is it almost any business that can make use of Illumio and almost any business that can benefit, or do you think there's some particular types of businesses that very much you would say, oh, we need to talk to you because?
It is something that any business can use, and it did, obviously, like any new technology. We started in 2015. There was obviously early adopters in banking and finance who used it for segregating SWIFT and PCI environments. We see a lot with the critical infrastructure people, so people who are covered by the NIST directive. But we're seeing increasingly it's used in high-tech sort of manufacturing where intellectual property is quite key. So it's like anything, it's a relatively new technology, and there are early adopters, but ultimately, it's likely to be used by everyone in the future, because as we said, as that edge breaks down, as you no longer can go into a data center and go, that's my application, You have to be able to do this, especially as people are adopting container technology and the cloud.
And I think the other thing that's interesting for me, I'm not sure that you'd agree with this, is that one of the things about cloud, for want of a better description, and I think it's the thing that everybody realizes, is that if you go big, for want of a better description, with one particular cloud vendor and then adopt the process and procedures of that vendor, it's almost impossible to move. It's almost impossible to get your data out. It's very difficult to be agile. And in actual fact, it's, as I know a lot of businesses have found, if you've put a lot of data, even doing something like an Exchange Online migration, you've done an Exchange Online migration and then you have to do something else with those mailboxes, pull that data out, or do something. These companies make it incredibly hard to get hold of your data and move it around. So if you've got a product like Illumio where you can go true multi-vendor at the back end, but join those systems together into these virtual network segments with these common security rules and everything else, it gives you real flexibility, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it is that, that whole decoupling piece. And it's interesting you get into the discussion about the shared responsibility model. And, that catches everyone out because everyone goes, oh, I'll just use AWS or Azure for security. And as soon as you want to go multi-cloud, or as soon as, because there is good reasons why people will say, well, I'll do things on GCP because it's more sophisticated. I'll do things on AWS because it's cheaper. I'll do, Azure, IBM, Oracle, whatever it happens to be. And if you're, if you take the decision that you're going to go multi-cloud, then you are taking the decision that you are completely responsible for your own security. And so you do need this decoupling effect. And again, the fact that that all of the technologies we've spoken about this morning do, give you a lot of that capability is of true benefit.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's review the poll questions and answers quickly. Let's see how they've done. So I'll put these up quickly and we can just rattle through them. So the first poll question we put up: how much longer is the Norwegian coastline to that of the USA? They all went for, the bulk of them went for 4 times longer.
It's 5. So so the US is about 20,000 kilometers. Norway, with all the islands, is about 100,000 kilometers.
Oh, there you go. See, they didn't get that right. That one, actually, that was their lowest choice, that one. So
yeah.
There you go. The 4th stage of a cyber kill chain, the bulk of them have gone for exploitation as the 4th stage.
Correct.
Excellent. And then last but not least, how much longer did it take to capture the crown jewels with tier-based segmentation? The bulk of them have gone for 900% longer.
Yep, that's correct.
Excellent. So they were listening. Good.
Yay.
Right. So I think we're pretty much ready now to move on into the Q&A session. And we are actually at the final draw 3 minutes late for it. Who'd have thought it, that we used all that extra time up? I could never have imagined that would happen. So let's go back one. I've got overclicked. So we've had a few questions in, but you lot have been a little bit shy. So if you want to throw any at us while we're discussing stuff, that would be great. The first question is really, I think, Kevin, if you can tackle this one, it's very much an Okta one, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but it specifically drills into the Azure AD question. And I know a lot of businesses face this, because if you're on an appropriate level of Microsoft subscription, and you've got Azure AD all set up, you've got conditional access, you've got MFA, you've got Microsoft is selling you the dream. You've got all these toys. So why would you need Okta as well? So if we tackle that one first, Kevin, if you want to take that one, and then we can kind of move on to some other questions. Hopefully, don't be shy, you lot. Do feel free to bang some in, even if it's just, you've got a panel of people here that you don't often get together. So if you've got any questions, please do throw them at us.
Yes, no, that's a good question, David. I mean, it's a common question we get quite a lot for, just why Microsoft, let alone specifically conditional access and MFA. So the core answer there is, if you're a pure Microsoft house, then it's a sensible way to go in terms of your one-stop shop. But if you want to be looking at best of breed and looking at wider collective cloud capability. So particular things from an MFA perspective, we believe we've got a wider range of MFA support because we support some third-party ones as well. But as far as the comment of it being no additional cost, it's actually an included cost in the actual per seat type licensing, as a lot of SaaS services are like that. But you've then got hidden costs of things like to be able to make that work properly, you need your ADFS servers, which you've probably spent a lot of time building a 6 set of servers on-prem. So there's some underlying infrastructure costs that can actually be reduced. So over a period of time, you may find that there is actually a cost benefit of using a third-party identity provider. And to the last point that was just being discussed there about Trevor saying switching from one cloud to another, AWS, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, various others, they all specialize in their own particular things. But the whole point of Okta is that we're a specialist identity provider, and that is our prime business. So we're there about doing it for scale, at cost, and user experience.
And I think you hit on, for me, one of the key points about this in what you were saying, which is identity. I don't think businesses have yet cottoned on to the fact that, in a world where any user can be working off pretty much any device from anywhere, the only thing you've really got is the identity of that person. It's the only thing you've actually got to work out whether they're allowed to access, what they're allowed. And, certainly if it's a high profile person within a business, or a person with a high level of access rights, who also say have access to online banking for that business, you need to be all over the identity of that person and to make sure that it is protected. Whereas if it's somebody with basically no access, who nobody's heard of, you would maybe ring a lower level of alarm bells based on the identity of that. But you can't. This is not about a machine anymore, where you can encrypt a machine and do the whole two-factor authentication onto the laptop itself, which unlocks it, and that's the only way onto the network. It is really all about the identity of the people now, isn't it, Kevin?
Yeah, and it's the granular level of that identity and the access rights and being able to validate those. So, conditional access is that, as I was saying, that combination of pulling together the different elements together. And it relies on network services. It relies on quite a few other things that the other vendors have been mentioning. But at the end of the day, it's a solution for you to control and meet your requirements. So.
No, okay, cool. Thank you for that. So we have had another question. It has the phrase CrowdStrike within it. So I will let you go with this one, Zeki. I've just put it in for you, but I'll read it out. Do you see the vulnerability assessment features of CrowdStrike growing in the short term, and to include Max in more detail? Oh, I think
the short answer is yes, definitely. Expanding that capability to support multiple different operating systems, similar to how our core endpoint technology supports various different operating systems.
Cool. Okay, we have another one. They're actually starting to ask some now, which is good. If you can keep them coming, guys, that would be absolutely fantastic. So would the hosts agree that security is not given the high level of respect that is due from companies not wanting to spend the extra on it? I think we'll go around the room on this one. Trevor, do you want to go first with that? Oh, I think you're muted at the moment. The old muted thing. It had to come in at some point, didn't it?
Yeah. I think in very few companies, it's people not wanting to spend money. I think it's that there is, a finite amount of budget and resource that people have. And it's an interesting thing here as to, do you spend enough to have minimum compliance? Do you invest in monitoring, so you know where to focus your resources, or do you try and solve every problem just as simply as you can? I remember talking to a customer who basically, he said, we have an amount of budget and resource, we stack rank the threats, and we work at the top and work our way down until we can't solve any more problems, and we accept that there is a risk there. It's a bit like the fact that not everyone patches every system because it takes so long. You patch the systems with the highest vulnerability. So I'm not sure it's that people don't respect it. I think there is just a limit of how much money and resource a company can and is practical to spend.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say maybe businesses put their effort. I mean, it's easy for us sat on the outside to point at somebody else's business and say you're spending it in the wrong place. But I think, what we've certainly seen as Bytes is the money is there. Businesses have got the money. Just I wouldn't necessarily always agree with where they're spending it. Kevin, what are your thoughts? Just kind of going around the room on this one. So would you agree that security is not given the level of respect by companies it should be?
I just need to. We're seeing an improvement in visibility. A lot of organisations are actually now recognising that security can be a business benefit rather than just an enforcement point, really from that perspective. And it's certainly becoming a more sort of acceptable capability if you look at customers who are doing much more customer identity and access management as opposed to internal. So internal was just seen as an acceptable overhead. But looking at the consumer side of things, it's very much about business enablement and that user experience and consumers having that level of trust of using mobile apps, web apps, online experiences. So I think there certainly is more awareness now that security is something that can be used to business benefit and growth. Yes, no, you're right. For the vast majority, it's still driven by audit and other demands, which is not seen as a revenue benefit.
And I think before I come on to you guys, Steve and Zeki, the other thing I see is that sometimes security, when something happens in a business and the floodgates do get open for security spend a little bit, which unfortunately is still one of the main drivers we find for security spend and infrastructure spend, is that it can then get out of control and go in different directions, which gives senior people in the business the ability to go, well, look, we told you didn't need that. I think, there has to be an appropriate level of spend, as you said, Trevor, you can't do everything. So it's finding that sweet spot, isn't it? Because you can't just keep adding more and more tools on and keep taking up more and more time and throwing more and more and stuff. You have to look at the risk the business is under and do something proportionate. Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, probably that last point I would agree. I think like a lot of things in life, it's about consequences, isn't it? It's what are the consequences, and the consequences to one organization may be very different to consequences to another organization. Big global company with a well-recognized brand, probably the proportion and the level of investment and focus on security, proportional to the consequences of their security being compromised versus a smaller SMB organization. So yeah, probably proportional to consequences.
No, okay, cool. And then Zeki, your thoughts on this one just before we move on?
Yeah, I think historically the issue is in the security teams have always been individuals or part of the organization that wants to take a lot of budgets but never really giving a lot of back. That's just an unfortunate way of security. Unless there's been a large scale incident where then money is thrown at the problem and then every solution is purchased. We're not very good in the business to go back and show what we've done, what our improvements are, or actually go back into the technology stack and make sure we're actually showing a good size return of investment based on the previous technology investments we've made. And I think we need to remember when we are looking to become or invest in new technology, that we need to make sure we are talking back to the business on the types of data sets that they require to run their organization, but also making sure that we're not just buying technology for the sake of buying technology. We're always looking into the previous past investments and making sure that they are still make sense today and for our future roadmap and security. But also making sure we have the right data to continuously track on our ROI or where we have provided cost efficiencies of what we have done to save the organization.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. I think one thing, one of the sort of a statement from me, I suppose, that I wouldn't mind you guys just commenting on, and we've got another Okta question, Kevin, for you in a second. Do you, I mean, I see this sometimes. Do you see some in businesses, and we'll go the other way around this time, Zeki, we'll start with you. Do you think businesses are too reluctant, or senior people within businesses are too reluctant to almost tear up what's gone before and say, look, I know that's what we said 3 years ago or 5 years ago. I know that's the direction we've been working in, but actually the technology's changed, the industry has changed. Certainly if we look at what Crowdstrike are bringing to the table, Palo Alto and Illumio, you know, for you four vendors, if you look at what you're bringing to the table, a lot of the product just didn't exist 5 years ago. Or even 3 years ago, and the ability to deliver didn't exist. So businesses have strategy documents, and those strategy documents have a lifetime. And do you think senior people may be a bit reluctant to not go, well, I know what I said 3 years ago, but actually, you know, I could tear this whole thing up and start again. And if I started again, it would look like this. So can we start doing that, please?
Yeah, I think the issue is, I will be honest, you know, when I go and speak to, you know, organizations on a regular basis, you know, some are very much like that and some are not. And I think one of the biggest issues that we have is we still remember 3 years ago on the amount of effort we had to put into building that strategy, that roadmap. And for a lot of organizations, it has been a lot of, you know, blood, sweat, and tears to get what they have today up and running. But that's not actually how modern technology works. And we have to remember that the age of technology, the platforms we build our technology on, you know, harnessing the likes of the cloud, allows us to be a lot more disruptive in a very, very small amount of time, allow us to be better integrated in the rest of the technology and process stack in a very, very short amount of time. And that allows us, you know, from two things, because it's so easy to implement, it also means it's very easy to change, evolve, also rip out and replace if it becomes something that's not right in our next interim. And I think we need to just become more aware that we need to be more disruptive, especially when we're building our own security stack. And, you know, take the agile development or software engineering world where we want to continuously reiterate and build and continue. And that's the same kind of mentality we need to have when it comes to building our security defense centers.
Okay, Steve, what about you?
I think if you look where we all sit from a vendor perspective and all of the content that's been, the interesting content that's been shared today, we kind of exist a little bit in a laboratory environment, in a clean room in that sense. Whereas, you know, the customer's world, it's very different. It's very complex. They've had systems and tools in place at various points in time where investments have been made. And yeah, I'm sure if you were starting a business from scratch today, you'd start with all of the best technology that exists, which probably in 6 months' time might be superseded. So it's a difficult one. And also, I think that there's the human factor where, you know, the people making the decisions around strategy and direction, CIO, CISO, whatever they may be, even through the organization to architects and security engineers. Well, fundamentally, they're human beings before they're any of those job titles, you know, and that means that they're subject to the emotions that we all are as human beings. So, you know, I've just taken this decision quite recently. Do I want to call out that we need to now do something else? You know, it's and put it in the parallel of what we all do in our own daily lives with decisions that we have to take around, you know, the family and the budget, everything like that. You know, it's difficult.
Yeah, no, agreed. Trevor, let's go to you next, and then Kevin, I can neatly segue off your comment on it into the last question we're going to do. So, Trevor, if you want to go next.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the interesting things is the whole digital transformation piece, and you know, we get a lot of discussions with DevOps and all these sort of guys. And so we see a transformation in the way that people build applications and the way they run their business. But I think one of the key things is that we have to emphasize is security has to transform in the same way. So, you know, where we are now with security is very different to where we were a couple of years because the environment that we're securing is very different. So, you know, 2-3 years ago, Palo Alto Networks mostly did firewalls, Crowdstrike just did EDR, Okta just did, you know, MFA, that sort of stuff. But the world has changed and security has changed with it. And so, you know, it is absolutely key that an organization, you know, when they talk about ripping up what was already there, it's a case they have to transform to keep up with the rest of the business. You know, we can't use the technologies that existed 3 years ago to solve the problems that exist now. So, you know, so we get into this whole where we're talking about, you know, the disintegration of the edge or the change of the edge. Security has to change and customers have to change their security with it.
Yeah, no, Understood and agreed. Kevin, so your last comment on that from you, and then we'll move on to our last question.
Well, I mean, we've all experienced digital transformation change in the last 10, 12 weeks. We've certainly, from an Okta point of view, seen a lot of organizations having to rapidly change some projects. Remote deployment or remote working is the key one. Some people had projects they're planning, in the next 12 months, they'd enable updates and refreshes. And I know certainly a couple of our customers have had to do that inside 2 weeks. And they were thinking, just absolutely impossible. But they've learned lessons from that. A lot of it's probably budget driven, business driven. The need to keep the lights on and things like that. But it's all about priorities and change. So adaptability, flexibility are really key elements in that, and be able to change direction. But that's why cloud services are very good. And if you think about it, even a good while back, the switch to take Salesforce as an example, many organizations switched to that. And it typically was all started by somebody getting a credit card out and saying, look, I want to make a change. I just can't wait for the internal services to catch up to provide what I need from a business point of view. And that's where most of the cloud has actually come from. So that's just really accelerating that growth and the need for it. But from a security perspective, agree with what the other vendors are actually saying, that it needs to adapt. But there is an element of trust at the end of the day. As was said by Steve, we're all humans, and security comes from trust. And therefore, newer organizations have got that challenge of trying to build that trust and establish that trust. And some organizations, yes, they're early adopters, bleeding edge adopters, but there's other organizations who are far more conservative, say, I'd prefer somebody else to go first and prove it works before we're going to do that. So
yeah, always. So one last question, and then just a couple of little bits of housekeeping for everybody. Does Okta see Okta Verify being used in social engineering attacks? Was the question that came through. I'm not sure.
Sorry, did I hear the question correctly there? Does Okta Verify being used as part of social engineering attacks or preventing it?
Let's assume preventing it. That's what it says word for word. Like I said, it's.
I mean, certainly from a prevention point of view, the point of any of the factors, Okta Verify with its push capability is certainly one of those core ones. But with the other third-party MFA factors that we support as well, tying those to a login certainly helps avoid brute force and social engineering type attacks. In this sense, we get a lot of, particularly in the Office 365 space or Google Suite, various other things, where it's very important persons being focused in terms of social engineering attacks or simple username password access mechanisms and account takeovers. So putting a factor alongside that in terms of its access policy is always a good thing to do. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess theoretically, if somebody really wanted to go to town on somebody, they could do a whole social engineering setup where they could try and persuade that person that they were help desk and that they needed to temporarily register their
yes,
token against that. I mean, you could go down that route if you really wanted to get access, couldn't you? But
yeah, you could. I mean, that's where some of the adaptive policies from an Okta point of view, there's the additional checks there for things like behavioral, whether it's seen as new device, new location. We can apply policies underneath that are typically not visible to the end user, but certainly visible for the administrator, and feed that through to SOCs or other services that can spot those trends.
Yeah. Okay, understood. All right, guys, thank you very much for your time today. That's the end of the Q&A and the panel discussion. So you're all released to go off and do whatever we do with our Thursday afternoons these days. Probably just sit on more online meetings and calls if you're anything like me. But thank you very much, guys. It's really appreciated. Couple of last bits of housekeeping from me before we wrap up. Please, can you use the submit feedback button that we discussed earlier, which is just underneath the window, kind of down underneath us somewhere. Please, can you use that? And there is, as we said, either the Echo Show 8 or the Google Nest big screen thing, whatever it's called, the Google Nest Home. Or the Lego BB-8 available for one of you on that. So there's that, and your Just Eat vouchers, your £15 Just Eat vouchers will be with you tomorrow morning, so you can have lunch on us on a Friday. So guys, all of you that are out there, thank you very much for joining. It's really appreciated. And with that, we will wrap up and call it a day. We will hope to see you all soon. Cheers. Thank you.